Okay. It's 5 past, so I think we'll make a start.
Yeah, good idea.
Okay. We would like to give you a warm welcome to our delegates at this year's North West Regional Women's Committee. Some housekeeping. Everybody is automatically muted, and we will ask you to stay muted unless you're invited to unmute to ask a question. Any questions to the committee or to our speakers today can be put in the chat facility. The conference is being recorded, but we'll only record those who are speaking and visible. So anybody who doesn't want to be recorded should switch their camera off. It's also important to keep the time, so we would ask everyone to return promptly from the comfort break and lunch break. Everyone who is registered should have received an agenda for the day. However, a copy has been put into the chat facility. It has always been the custom to have a collection and raffle at the conference, but as this isn't possible this year, the Secretariat would like to ask the conference to agree for the committee to make a £50 donation to the Manchester Food Bank instead. So can I ask if you agree with this, that the committee makes this donation?
Agree.
I was going to say, do you want to put hands up? Lost my Zoom button now. Brilliant. That looks like it was unanimous. Thank you, ladies. The proceeds of the raffle would usually go to the UNISON's own welfare fund there for you. And anyone who would have bought raffle tickets could make a small donation to the There For You instead. So I'm just asking, can we remind our branches of the importance of donating to the fund to help our members? Thank you. 2021 has turned out to be an extremely busy year for the committee, and as many of you will know from the many emails you received, thanks Jen, I would just like to say a big thank you to all our members who have enthusiastically volunteered to serve onto the 4 working groups we have set up to deliver our objects. And also the many members who have signed up for our Smear on Demand campaign by writing to their GPs to ask for the guidance to be amended to allow GPs to be able to provide a test for women under the age of 25 who would present with symptoms. We'd also like to thank you of those who have produced selfie video clips explaining why you support the campaign. All these things really do make a difference, and we will be lobbying MPs again in the earnest after the summer break. If you haven't yet signed up to the campaign, please do so, and the link can be copied into the chat facility. The Women in Leadership team is moving at a great pace and is currently working hard to complete the workbooks and are rolling out stage 2 in October for those who have completed stage 1. And in November, we will be launching stage 1 again, so keep your eyes peeled for the poster and application forms. The other working groups are the Menopause Action Working Group and the Domestic Abuse Working Group. There is also a group of women working hard to organise leadership training for committee members. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with Jen if you would like to become involved. The committee are also holding a session on the 6th of October for domestic abuse. One of the highlights of this year has been seeing the response to the committee's first Women in Unison Recognition Scheme Awards. Unison's first woman, General Secretary Christina McInerney, will speak in more detail about this later today when she announces our first ever winner and 2 runners-up. But I would like to thank all those branches and individuals who nominated women for the extraordinary efforts they've made to the life of the union between March 2020 and March 2021. And thanks also to committee members who had the tough job of voting for the 3 finalists. We can be very proud of every single woman nominated, and I would like to give them all a virtual round of applause. We are empowered and growing stronger by the day. We should all be very proud of our hard work and achievements. I hope you enjoy the day with the array of speakers we have put together for you. And I'd now like to hand over to my fellow co-chair, Liz Cameron. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. What more can I say? Sharon's really gave us off to a good start with everything that she's outlined for the work of the committee. And rather than just start with, you know, what always seems to be quite bleak for me, because I'm going to start talking about what hasn't been so okay for us, I think I do want to welcome everybody who is here and just thank everybody for their enthusiasm and actually for making this Women's Committee not feel at all like it was going through a pandemic. We've actually had more meetings, some more interaction with people, albeit virtual. We've had some very interesting training and that has covered very different areas that Leos have taken on board, and we've really, I think, worked well with other committees. And yes, and I would just underline that I feel regretful that today we sort of haven't got somebody going round with a bucket and some raffle tickets, which always somebody in the committee was used to do. We'd either see Karen Naramore or Angie Greenhalgh. So one of the usuals going round with a bucket and the tickets in hand. But whilst we all sort of reached into our purses for that, it's that important thing that we know that some woman somewhere who's in absolute dire straits will be able to speak to There For You when they haven't got uniform for a child or cannot make a payments on a bill or a mortgage. So I can't impress you enough how important that is. But where we are this year, I think my overarching theme is to talk about the inequalities that there really have been in society. We all know from the disproportionate impact we saw of COVID on people who were from minoritized groups, particularly Black and Brown, that we died in disproportionate numbers and are still continuing to do so. When we looked into why that could be the case, and we are still pressing for a proper inquiry into this, it was really clear that it was, yes, they were disproportionate numbers from people who were African Caribbean, you know, Jamaican, from the islands, who were Pakistani, coming from India. What was this commonality that we all had as we saw people shrink away from us on the streets and in the supermarkets because they thought we were somehow dirty because we're infected with COVID? But in actual fact, we're all dirty. None of us know who's carrying COVID. It's not always obvious. And it even got to the stage where they said that people wouldn't be carrying symptoms. So who did we know to keep a distance from? The fact is that what it revealed is that society is unequal, and that those people were more likely to be in the worst jobs, the ones that they couldn't frankly say that they weren't going in the next day. They didn't have the options of furlough being offered to them. If they were going to take time away because they thought they were shielding, then they simply wouldn't have been paid or able to feed their families or look after their households. And therefore they were pressured into working. And that is society's fault, because we don't treat people equally. We predominate 0-hour contracts and precarious work into women who are from ethnic minority groups. It's a fact. And even though it's one that we don't like to think about, we like to think of all the same and all together and all fighting from the same place, it's actually just not true. The housing situations of overcrowding are more likely to be found in those groups. The lack of appropriate healthcare was more likely to be found in those groups. And today you will hear about how women in those groups disproportionately die in childbirth in numbers that we shouldn't even be talking about in a century like ours. Numbers that had died out in the 1900s is what women from those ethnic groups are experiencing. So really, when we are talking about the theme of this conference, which is emerging from a post-pandemic world, You know, do we feel like we've really come out of it? Do we feel that we're going to be safe on the 19th? Are we all going to have a celebration as we fling our masks up in the air? I don't think so. So many of us, our situations really haven't changed. Many more of us have lost our jobs and are in a worse situation than they were. I myself was a COVID casualty in terms of my work. Praise God, I've managed to secure another role now, but I had to experience that. So I fully have every sympathy with anybody who's gone through some of those negative circumstances. And just to finish, and Black Lives Matter came during this period of time. And people like me had their worlds changed, really rocked from the rafters, as we feel like all those things that we have been going through, suppressing for so many years, just couldn't stay in anymore. We felt as though our necks had been kneeled on. And it's not even for the appalling 9 minutes, 12 seconds, I think they said in the end, that George Floyd experienced as he was murdered in front of the eyes of the world. But it was longer. It's been our lifetimes that we have accepted some of these situations, and people said no more. And we'd have thought that we turned a corner on that as equality, diversity and inclusion posts popped up here and there. We've seen more people from different cultural groups and adverts and, you know, on TV. But we then managed to claw our way through a European Championship, which to me, who's a serious football fan, is a nigh on miracle, with a miracle team that's been put together using completely different criteria to what England would normally do, and has looked for innovation, creativity, new people to get on board. And we see the appalling racism that those players have gone through. And that's where I will hand over to the motion that I'm about to read. We wouldn't normally start conference with a motion, but I feel that this is important to set the tone of what this committee stands for. And for this, I would like to read the motion and have Leslie Lancelot second this motion. It is her motion that she penned. Knowing her as well as I do, I know she wouldn't want that praise or thanks, but I give her that praise and thanks because I give her that praise and thanks as a Black woman who is honestly tired. I'm worn out from being the one in the room who has to mention the inequalities, the way that we completely will be sidelined as Black people. So I am going to read the motion with her permission. I hope I have her approval. I can't see her on screen, but if Jen says that's okay, I'll go forward and read the motion, and hopefully that she would be seconding it. So this is a motion in support of England's 3 Lions for UNISON Northwest Women's Conference. Conference recognises the commitment of Marcus Rashford, Bukayo Saka and Jadon Sancho to the success of England's national football team in the recent UEFA Euro Championship that saw the team reach the final of the competition. This conference also recognises and supports the actions against racism taken by all the England football players in taking the knee. This conference further recognises and condemns the racist backlash that these 3 players have been subject to since the defeat of the team by the Italian team in that competition. This conference applauds both the English and Italian players as all the players took the knee at the start of the final. Something that I have to say that our Prime Minister did not approve of at the time. All the England footballers, the manager and backroom staff who have made statements condemning the racism directed at the players of colour within the England team squad, we applaud them too. And we note that the England team would not exist without that diversity. Building on immigration. The England national football team contains only 3 players whose immediate family line does not contain immigrants. And the conference further believes that Tory anti-immigration policies underwrite the racism that England players face, both before and after this tournament. Statements made by senior politicians that taking the knee is gesture politics. We've had our own chief inspector for GMP say such statements, and that English supporters were right to boo the action stoked up these things stoked up racism and directly contributed to the racist reaction, which was then shown by the whole team. Literally, people looked at what was being sent from the top, specifically Sacco, Sancho and Rashford. Divisions within our society have been created by years of cuts to public service budgets under the guise of the austerity agenda. So let us know who our real enemy is. So this conference resolves to send a message of support to the England football squad and management, to the English Football Association, and to send a message of support citing this motion to the Stand Up to Racism event in St. Peter's Square, Manchester at 1 o'clock today, in fact. And I am adding a bullet point there that we would resolve to work as a women's committee to support all initiatives that look towards eradicating racism from UNISON and certainly our society. Thank you. I move. Oh.
I second. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Liz. I was really moved by the backlash that occurred and was directed specifically at these 3 players, and I was appalled by it. One thing that has occurred though during this week that I've not seen in my lifetime is an outpouring of love and support from people across our community that ignored divisions that are created by this society, and people have come together. I wasn't there, but my daughter and granddaughters were at Marcus Rashford's mural in Withington in Manchester on Tuesday night, and Corinne said to me, "Mum, you'd have loved it." There was people from all over, all sorts of walks of life who were there, and everybody came together to support these players with love and respect and to say no to racism. And I think that's important that we recognise that. And thank you for accepting this motion, and I second. Thanks.
You're on mute, Liz.
Thank you so much for those points, Leslie. I think that's the right way that we go into our work and our meetings. And can we take a vote, please? Can conference indicate, let's say, can you indicate back? Yes, support. Thank you. Any people against? Any abstentions? Thank you so much. Let conference begin. So so let's start conference now. For our first speaker, are we there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Can I introduce Molly Mayer to speak to us today and join our Regional Women's Conference?
Sorry, just before Molly comes in, we do have another motion. It was Aileen.
Oh,
it's on the agenda. We were just going to start with the motions and then come to the main business.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I didn't know if you wanted to do both the motions at once or just the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we do have a second motion. And do we have a mover for the motion?
I'll move.
Yep. Lovely.
Aileen was going to read out her motion and then call on the conference to support it. It's about single parents
that the committee agreed would be to kick off the conference because of the subject. Okay, so I think Aileen is with us.
Aileen,
Yeah.
if you're with us, yeah, lovely. Of course you are. Are you ready? Are you ready to move the motion?
I am, yeah. Hi, yeah. I feel a bit emotional actually after listening to the other motion. And of course, a lot of the England players as well have been brought up in single parent families, which I wonder if also adds to the amazing works that they've done too. Before I read the motion, I just wanted to say thank you to Mags Abbott, who's been so supportive to me in the last year and helped to increase my confidence, especially around speaking in front of people, which is one of the reasons why I'm able to read this out today. So this is the Single Parents' Rights Campaign supporting single parent being added to the Equality Act 2010 as a protected characteristic. Conference notes that within the UK, approximately a quarter of families with children are headed by a single parent, and of those single parents, 90% are female. Historically, single parents have been demonised and discriminated against in a systemic way. This has led to a situation where single parents will face difficulties in work, around renting homes, when taking children for days out, and in many other aspects of their lives. Yet single parents are not named as a protected characteristic in the Equality Act 2010. Single parents are now encouraged into work when their children are fairly young, and it is more likely that single mothers will have younger children. Despite this, single parents face more barriers within employment than people in two-parent families, and hiring practices are often unfavourable to their responsibilities. The struggle of juggling home life while working means that 22% of single mothers need to claim out of work benefits again within a year of starting employment. Statistically, single mothers are now just as likely to be employed as single women with no dependents, but they are more likely to live in poverty than any other adult group. On average, single parent family incomes are 27% less than other families. The Single Parents' Rights Campaign was started by a single parent who had found rules and policies were too often putting her at a disadvantage. This was clearly seen with rules around COVID and contact with others. The campaign is now backed by numerous charities and single parent groups. And a recent study by the Single Parents' Rights Campaign found that 80% of respondents felt they had experienced discrimination, and 96% of respondents felt single parents should be added to the Equality Act 2010. So conference believes that single parents should be added to the Equality Act 2010 as a protected characteristic so that they can be given the same protection as other discriminated against groups. This will give single parents protection from discrimination inside and outside of work. The conference will support and promote the Single Parents' Rights Campaign, support reps in asking workplaces to implement single parent friendly policies, and check that UNISON's own policies, work practices, training, etc. do not discriminate against single parents. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done, Aileen. Absolutely superb. Do we have a seconder for this motion, please?
Hi Liz, I'll second it.
Thank you. And I'd like to speak to the motion. Do we have any speakers for the motion? Anybody who wants particularly to speak on the motion? I just would want to add to that I think it was so important to stress the fact that when we even looked at those footballers that we're talking about who experienced racism, we recognize that, you don't always know what the struggle has been of a single parent to bring their children through to the stages that they do. It's a disgrace that this has not been legislated for people. It's a very clear place of discrimination that has continued with women year upon year without the pressure that it's needed from above to actually change rules, to change benefit amounts, and to recognise the support that single parents need. And that's why we're going to have this particular motion looked at really by putting forward one of our speakers today. We're going to have more emphasis into that. And so people really do need to support this, and we do support it wholly from Women's Committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Well, ladies, that's another 2 powerful motions coming from our empowering women in the Northwest. And you should be, I'm getting emotional, you should be really, really proud of putting those together and bringing them forward to us, so that we can actually take these out across the Northwest and the region, and hopefully up and down the country. Absolutely fantastic. So that's a brilliant start to today's meeting.
So we take, sorry, just to take the vote.
Next speaker is Janet Farrer.
Yep, we need to take the vote.
Oh,
Sharon.
sorry.
Yeah,
Conference
can we take the
supports this.
vote?
Yes.
Conference
Well done.
supports this motion.
Yes,
Can we see all in favour, please?
thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Anybody against? Abstentions? Clearly carried. Well done. Well done,
Thank you
Aileen.
so much.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Well done, Aileen. Just one word before I hand over to Sharon now, is just to say that today at conference, we are going to be hearing about the disproportionate impact on single parents, about our mental health, about low-paid public sector workers who couldn't afford to eat, pregnant Black and Asian women, and all women. And we do thank them very, very much for kindly giving up their time to join us today. We're not able to pay our speakers, and I think it's really important that people know that people who join us as speakers for our conferences do it because they are passionate about the issues. Thank you so much. Over to you, Sharon.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, our next speaker is Janet Farrer, the lecturer in the trade union education and also president-elect of the UCU. Janet's going to talk to us about the importance of mental health. So if you'd like to ask any questions, please put them in the chat. And when Janet's finished, we'll take the questions. Is that okay, Janet?
That's brilliant, Sharon. Yeah, thank you.
I'll pass over to you. Thanks, Janet.
That's great. Can you hear me all right? Yeah? Okay, great stuff. Thank you. And thanks to Liz as well. What a kind of uplifting start to your conference. I feel really privileged to be here. I've got a PowerPoint to show you, but I'm not a big fan of I do this all the time because I've been teaching online since we went into lockdown in March 2020. So but I'm not a big fan of just having the PowerPoint and not being able to see everyone. So I'll probably keep coming out of it and seeing if anyone's got any questions as we go through. So please do, use the raise hand thing I think you've all found it from your votes anyway. So delighted to be here. Really, really pleased. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm just going to attempt to share this now. I've already done a little bit of a practice run, so hopefully you can see that all right. Yeah, right, brilliant. Okay, so just a little word before I introduce myself properly. We're not going to get into the proper kind of nuts and bolts of mental health today, but that doesn't mean that some of you won't be impacted by it. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that every single person here will have been touched by mental health in some way, whether that's personally or whether that's a family member or a close person. So if you do find anything that we talk about challenging or distressing, do feel free to kind of take a little bit of time and make sure that you're looking after yourself and your own mental health and that goes beyond this talk. Actually, it's really important that you do that. So just a little bit about me and what I do. I'm just going to minimize that so I can see. I can't work out how to make it on the screen. What do you call it? When it goes through bit by bit. Never mind. As long as you can see it, that's the main thing. So I do have a personal and professional interest in mental health. When I was 19, I had a really traumatic experience and experienced post-traumatic stress disorder, which turned into anxiety. And it took me a number of years, well, it took a long time to even be diagnosed, and then it took me a number of years of counselling and support to be able to get through that. And I'm very well now, which is great. I also have some family members who experience mental health issues, so I do have a personal interest as well, and I'm happy to share that with the committee. My professional interest in mental health is as a lecturer in trade union education at the Manchester College, and we teach mental health awareness. So the reason that I'm here is I did some mental health awareness sessions with some groups of UNISON reps and members that kind of led to this point. But we're really trying to work with as many unions as possible who are telling us that what their members need and what their reps need is awareness training around this. So that's part of what we do. And then we also deliver mental health first aid, which some of you might have heard of, and I'm happy to kind of talk more about. So I'm qualified as a youth mental health first aid instructor. So for people who are working with children from ages 8 to 18, covered in that course. So that's my day job. My other job is as president-elect of UCU. I chair our National Further Education Committee, so because I work in an FE college, and that covers further education, adult and community education, and prison education as well. And I also chair Busy Bee that I am, our National Anti-Stress and Bullying Working Group, and we do a lot of work around mental health. As kind of complementing that, I'm also a member of the North West TUC Executive Committee, representing UCU, and with my wonderful colleague Karen Kendrick from the Communication Workers Union, we've been delivering a series of mental health matters webinars, which I'm going to mention at the end, and you're all invited to come to those. Are about once a month usually. So that's a little bit about me. Obviously, I've not got loads of time today. You've got a packed agenda, much more important things than listening to me. So I will make sure that I'm finished by 11:15, even if we haven't quite got through everything that's on the slides. But I'm happy for the slides to be shared if that's something that is useful, and then you can. I'll give you my email address as well in case you've got any questions or if you want to get in touch. So I just want to kind of thinking about the theme of your conference and how mental health fits into that, kind of develop a brief understanding of mental health and highlight its importance to women workers, and think about the particular impact on the pandemic, which we've obviously heard a lot about today already, on women members' mental health. A little bit about equality law, not too much, bit about stress in the workplace, and think about those of you who, I know this is a mixture of different people, but those of you who are union reps or who are supporting union reps, and thinking about what our role is in that. So just we said interactive session, it's not that easy with loads of you, but I'd like you to, if you will, type into the chat box one word that comes to mind when I say mental health. Stop sharing. It can be anything. You can have more than one word if you want, but not loads. Give everyone a minute. There's some really good stuff in there already. I'll just give everyone another minute. Michelle's had some training, I can tell. Okay, right, I'm going to pick up, please do keep them coming if you're still thinking about it. Some brilliant stuff in there if you look at the kind of range of it. There's a lot of negative words in there, which is completely understandable because the way that society treats mental health is from a negative standpoint. So it's quite natural for people to think about depression and think about anxiety and think about mental ill health. Emma's mentioned stigma absolutely. Although I like to think of myself as a glass half full person, we've still got a long way to go in terms of stigma around mental health, especially in the workplace, but not exclusively in the workplace. But we have made some great, I do see a difference even from when I first started teaching this stuff. So I'm feeling positive that more people are talking about mental health and more people want to talk about it. I wouldn't have mentioned what happened to me at a session, probably even a few years ago. But hopefully people feel in a slightly safer place now to be able to do that. Fear, sadness, absolutely. Lack of life purpose. Misunderstood is interesting, Joanne. I completely agree with that. Mental health is so complex, and the reason that we struggle with employers is because employers don't understand things that can't be put in a nice neat box. So if you can't define something and say this is what depression looks like, this is what is going to happen to a worker if they've got depression, this is what they're going to need, it's not as neat as that, and employers really struggle with that. And of course the kind of non-linear nature of mental illness is that you might be absolutely fine and then have a period of being unwell, and then you might feel fine again. But that unfortunately some employers that I deal with treat that as so therefore it can't be real, or it's not true, or it's put on in some way because it isn't linear, and that is absolute nonsense. I'm sure you all know. But yeah, I do think it's massively misunderstood actually. Lonely, yeah, and a struggle, completely agree. I'll come back to Michelle's. Hopeless, isolation, some brilliant words in here. I wish I could do one of those word bubbles. If I could do something fancy, then that would be very exciting, wouldn't it? But you'll just have to imagine that word bubble in your head. So there's so much stuff in there that's really, really important. I'm going to come back to what Michelle put. So a state of being either in negative ill health or positive mental health. And that's, you really get into kind of the crux of it there, Michelle, in terms of the definition. So I'm going to pick that back up, because although we tend to go to the negative for the reasons that I've already described, actually mental health is a neutral term. Yeah, everybody in this room has mental health in the same way that everybody in this room has physical health. Sometimes it's better than others. And the more that we can get towards moving away from that stigma and getting towards parity with physical health, I think that would be when we're truly at a place where it's starting to be understood. So to kind of pick up from that, I'll go back to my PowerPoint here. So thank you everybody for that. That's great. So there are some kind of, I don't think these are perfect, by the way, but just in terms of thinking about what mental health means, the World Health Organization described it, getting for a while ago now. I wonder if they're thinking of writing a new definition in 2014, a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to her or his community. So, I mean, if we had more time, I would unpick that with you, because I think there's a lot of meaningless stuff in that. Obviously, as trade unionists, we clearly believe that we are making a contribution to our community, but not everybody would necessarily believe that. Normal stresses of life are so different for everyone, and being able to cope in itself is actually a little bit of a kind of complex idea. What does that even look like? Are you coping if you manage to get out of bed in the morning and go to work? Maybe not. More useful for me is the ACAS definition, that mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. And it also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. I don't know about you, but that speaks much more to me about what I think about in terms of mental health. So just to kind of take that a little bit further, some of you might have seen this before. It's something that we use in mental health first aid. And essentially, it reminds us that everybody is somewhere on a continuum in terms of mental health. And depending on what life throws at you, and goodness me, we've been dealing with some serious stuff over the last 18 months or so, how we feel on a daily basis is going to be completely dependent on so many different factors. So for some people, if they wake up in the morning and it's raining, that their mental well-being is going to be lower and further down that vertical line than it would be if it was really sunny, like hopefully it is for most of you today. But you can see as well, hopefully you're taking that in as I'm speaking, you've also got whether or not somebody has a diagnosis across that middle line, which again isn't necessarily indicative of how well somebody is feeling. So for example, you might have a really serious mental illness that's been diagnosed on the far left, but you might be somewhere near the top left, where actually it's controlled, you're getting help, you're getting treatment, maybe you're on medication and you're actually feeling very well. So the point is, think about everything that we deal with in life, you know, as people, as women, you know, anything that happens, bereavements, if you think about difficulties at work, difficulties with finance, all of the things that we've heard about today already, racism, discrimination, you know, being treated badly by your employer. It might be that a family member is very upset and that impacts on your mental health. There's just so much going on. You know, if your football team loses, that might impact on your mental health. So that the idea, what I'm trying to get at here, if we're thinking about kind of employment situation and us being in work, is if we can get to a stage where employers understand that continuum and where people are on it is going to change and is therefore going to impact on their productivity, it's going to impact on how they approach work. It might mean that they're late for work. You know, there's so many things that happen as a result of where people are on that continuum, and it's not in people's control. You know, that is the biggest battle, I think, that need to understand, that this isn't choice stuff. This is about, I'll tell you a really good analogy actually that I've completely nicked from my colleague Nige, who's wonderful. If you think about mental health as the temperature in the room, okay, so if we were in a reader point now, I'm sure it'd be lovely and cool with the air conditioning or whatever, but some of you would be sat there with your coat on, okay, and some of you would, like me, would be sat there too warm, like not coping with it. And none of us are right or wrong, it's just how we respond to the temperature in the room. And mental health is the same. So if you think about a bereavement, how somebody responds to that bereavement is going to be completely different depending on the relationship they have with that person. It might be if they're already feeling mentally unwell, that they're particularly impacted by it. And it isn't right or wrong, it's just different. And that's why one of the battles we've got, and hopefully I'll get a few eye rolls to this one, resilience training. If any of your employers are trying to put on resilience training, the whole concept is flawed. Because what you're saying is, I'm going to teach you how to be able to cope, even though I know nothing about your situation. I know nothing about the chemical balance in your brain. I know nothing about what's going on at home. I know nothing about any medication you're taking. And yet I can teach you to be able to cope, to be more resilient, to bounce back. When you think about that as a concept, it's flawed. It's fundamentally flawed. What we need is employers to be teaching people to understand what is going on for people and how it's impacting them in the workplace. You can't get me started on this one because I'll never stop, and I know we've got limited time. So let me go back to my PowerPoint there. I should pause actually and see if there's any questions or any comments at this point. Say I would. My next door neighbour's banging as well. Can you hear that, Jen? You've had the drills and stuff. Yeah, they like to wait until I start teaching usually, and then the postman does the same. We've got some kind of pact on the go. Gemma, let me bring you in.
Thank you. Completely agree with what you're saying, and I'm really interested about the resilience training, because I think also sometimes it ignores the fact that it's things that the workplace are doing about our intensified work, or insecure contracts, and cuts in our sectors, and we can't resilient our way out of that. And I'm not sure that's even a word. But yeah, thank you.
It absolutely should be, Gemma. I might make it into one. Yeah, completely agree. And it's putting the focus on the individual, you know, and it takes the employer's responsibility out of it. And let's be honest, the employer's got a legal responsibility actually to make sure that the workers are well in the workplace. I'll come on to that when we talk about stress. Yeah, completely agree on that. And it just lets them off the hook, ultimately, doesn't it? And it means that they can tick another box, and therefore that's done. We've taught them to be more resilient. They're still unwell, therefore we can put them on capability and do whatever we want. And that is just so problematic on so many levels. Thank you. Right, let's come back to this then. Come back too far, never mind. Slideshow, that's the word I was looking for before. Okay, so we don't talk enough, I don't think, about good mental health, what good mental health looks like. And I really, really like this first definition from a joint union report a few years old now. It's worth a read if you're interested. Preventing work-related mental health conditions by tackling stress. So TUC have done a lot of work on this, and they talk about good mental health being about positive well-being, about feeling in control of one's life, valued at home and at work, and generally relaxed and positive. But another really important addition is from an excellent organisation called the Mental Health Foundation, and I've put their website on my references at the end. They do lots of podcasts. They do kind of sleep podcasts. So so sleep has a huge impact on our mental health. You will know what it's like if you've had a bad night's sleep and then you're expected to perform in some way. So yeah, check out Mental Health Foundation, they're fab, and they say the good mental health isn't simply the absence of diagnosable mental health problems. And I think that's really, really important. You know, you can't just say, I don't have depression, or I'm not experiencing depression, therefore I've got good mental health. It doesn't work like that. It's much more about feeling relaxed, positive, feeling valued, getting some praise, feeling in control. Yeah, all of those things that are in that first definition. But again, we need to think about kind of how employers put this forward. And unfortunately, again, I think the hearts are in the right place sometimes, by the way, I should say that. And sometimes when our employees are trying to do things like, you know, let's put on some yoga classes, let's do some mindfulness training, great, you know, they're going in the right direction, but it isn't tackling the issues that are actually happening in the workplace in the first place that are causing people to feel like that. It's just a sticking plaster. So great, let's have that. Let's not turn our nose up at that. But that is not going to fix the issues that we have with workload and stress. And as Gemma said, insecure contracts and all of the things that we're dealing with in the workplace. So thinking about the pandemic now and kind of impact on women in particular, you know, clearly, as we've already discussed, everything impacts on our mental health. So thinking about the pandemic, so what Liz spoke about earlier so powerfully about the inequalities being exacerbated in the pandemic. So we knew when they were there, they've just kind of, you know, gone tenfold, and we're starting to see them so clearly. Stuff around job security and housing, caring responsibilities. We've already talked about single parents today. Loneliness, so much loneliness, you know, during the pandemic. People who live alone are not automatically lonely, but throw them into a pandemic where they can't see anyone and they're going to be in a different situation. Of course, women are having to juggle disproportionately work responsibilities with homeschooling, you know, and sometimes employers aren't interested in them, how they're having to deal with that, or interested in giving them the flexibility that they need to do that. And of course, domestic abuse. I'm glad to hear that you're having some training. This is something I teach as well. So the Office of National Statistics reported a 7% increase in instances of domestic abuse in 2020 compared to the same period in 2019, and an 18% increase from 2018. So you can start to see probably where we're going to be in 2021. We've mentioned the football already. We also know that that had a huge impact on domestic abuse as well. So women are actually having to deal with so much more given the pandemic. And of course, that is going to move them around that continuum, not in a good way. All right. So just thinking a little bit more about mental health and gender, you know, mental health issues, of course, affect all genders. But the Mental Health Foundation that I've already mentioned identifies that 1 in 5 women have common mental health issues compared with 1 in 8 men. You will, I'm sure, be aware that actually, when we think about these statistics, we know that women are much more likely to seek help or to talk to someone than men would be. So it might not be that they have more mental health issues, it might just be that more are reported. But we do know that women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with anxiety disorders. And the World Health Organization suggests that a combination of gender bias and gender-specific risk factors affect the reporting, diagnosis and treatment of mental health issues. So if we think about some of our Black and Asian minority ethnic communities and some of the cultures that might prevent people feeling they can report something, and that the same goes with domestic abuse, of course. So what role do we have to play? A huge one in terms of in the workplace and of course in wider society, challenging gender stereotypes related to role, identity and perceived gendered mental health problems. You know, that we've got a role to play when we think about stigma and think about how people talk about mental health. You know, we need to be challenging when people are using language that is problematic or kind of gendering things in a way that is inappropriate. So let me just move on and I'll pause in a second. So the other big impact, of course, is around austerity. And again, just to nick another one of Nigel's wonderful analogies, if you think of mental health as a table with 4 legs, and I always have to write that, if I had a board, I would write this down. One of the legs is family. One of the legs is work. I'll put these in the box in a minute. One of the legs is health, and one of the legs is finances. Okay, so think about that as a table. And if one of those legs, if you like, if one of those legs starts to get a bit wobbly, it's going to impact on the rest of the table. Okay, if 2 of those legs are wobbly, there's a real serious possibility that the table is going to come crashing down. So that's how all of those things could potentially impact. Let me put those things in the chat. Multitasking again, that's a gendered stereotype. I'm rubbish at multitasking. There we go. So yeah, so if we think about austerity and the situation that we are still living in, there is definitely a clear link between income inequality and mental health well-being. Every single study shows it. Poor mental health is at least twice as likely for those who are experiencing social disadvantage. The lowering of mental health well-being will, in many instances, increase mental health issues. And we've not mentioned substance abuse and alcohol abuse, but actually, again, more likely in deprived communities and therefore more likely to have a negative impact on mental health. It has an impact on suicide rates and on social isolation. You can see how all of those things are interlinked. Of course, we know that there's been a real terms massive reduction in funding of mental health, and actually that is what we now need. We need real, there've been a few tokenistic things from this government, but really they are just that. We need proper mental health funding, because at the minute, organisations like UNISON's There For You, other kind of employee assistance programs, things that unions are doing, charities, they're all propping up the NHS in terms of mental health. And the NHS is doing a cracking job, but they're doing it without the resources, and it's not going to work. It's not going to last much longer. So let me pause then. Listen, the last thing I've said on that slide is that better mental health actually does have financial benefits for employers. And when we go into these negotiations with employers, the more that we can highlight how things are going to benefit them, specifically in terms of money, the more likely they are to buy in, unfortunately. That's the way it works. Let me just pause for a second, have a sip of water and see if anyone's got any questions or comments. Kind of rattling through this a little bit. So hopefully you'll be able to have a look at the PowerPoint yourselves and kind of take it properly. Okay, let me go back then. So just in terms of, like I say, I'm aware that some of you will be working for UNISON, some of you will be union reps, some of you will be members, well, you're all members, of course, but ultimately, knowing our rights as members, as reps, as whoever, union employees, is just the most important thing. I'm sure you probably know this already, but just to go through it really briefly, the two main strands of legislation that kind of cover mental health are the Equality Act and health and safety legislation, which I'll talk about briefly. So, and you know, you will be absolutely amazed how many employers literally don't even know this basic stuff. It's quite scary, actually. So we know that the Equality Act says that we can't be discriminated against because of our disability, and that's the one that I want to focus on in terms of, because again, kind of under what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of people don't realise that, you know, the Equality Act says if somebody has a mental or physical impairment that has a substantial and long-term adverse impact on a person's ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities, we quite often think about physical impairments. We think about, and I'll talk about reasonable adjustments in a minute. You know, we don't think about those mental impairments, and we're not just talking about things like neurodiversity, like autism and those kinds of conditions, learning disabilities. Mental health actually comes under this as well. And again, something that isn't known very widely in my experience is that a formal medical diagnosis is not always necessary, because that also comes with its own kind of baggage and its own issues. And we still have GPs saying to people, what would you like me to put on your sick note? You know, and unfortunately, although they're doing that from a good place because they know that employers will target people, it isn't ultimately helping anybody, because it's just increasing the stigma, in my opinion. And impairment also includes any impact of medication. Okay, so any of the effects or symptoms of a mental illness. So, for example, if you're taking antidepressants and it's making you very unwell, that would also be covered under this disability label. So I'm just going to kind of go through a couple more bits about this. Long term basically means if it's lasted for 12 months or more, or it's likely to last for 12 months or more. So if you think about mental health, there are very few mental health conditions that would probably last less than 12 months. It's quite, although there is quite a good recovery rate for mental health conditions, it's also incredibly rare that it would last less than 12 months. So you can see how they can quite often fall into this legal definition. And of course, I've mentioned the fluctuating nature of mental health issues as well. Put a little bit of a reference there. I won't dwell on that. Something that I do want to mention though is a reasonably recent employment tribunal case that involved a worker who, apologies, I don't have the reference off the top of my head. I'm not very good at quoting employment tribunals. I tend to read them and then forget the names. There was a worker who basically was incredibly mentally unwell, didn't declare it to his employer, because that's something that we are also is a bit of an issue. So if we think about stigma, we know that lots of people are experiencing mental health issues and don't actually want to, aren't in a position where they feel they can declare it to their employer, which I think reflects on the employer actually rather on the person themselves. And so your man didn't declare it to his employer. He was then sacked for something spurious. He took them to a tribunal, and although he hadn't told the employer, he was still found in favour because he had such an extreme change in behaviour. So he was like the kind of archetypal life and soul of the party. Very suddenly became incredibly withdrawn, very quiet, withdrew from the workplace, didn't want to be involved in anything. And the tribunal found actually the employer was liable because they hadn't done enough to find out what was happening with that worker, to ask the right questions. So that's an incredibly important case, because now it's, again, thankfully, that's given us a shift away from the individual in terms of it's your responsibility, it's your mental health condition. You need to tell your employer. You need to, you know, just pull yourself together and tell your employer. Actually, it isn't necessarily the case. The employer has a responsibility. Okay, and that's proven that, so that's good. Let me come back to this then briefly. Hopefully you're still with me. So yeah, drug and alcohol abuse isn't actually covered under the Policy Act. That doesn't mean that when we are looking to negotiate workplace mental health policies, which, you know, I would highly recommend that you do if you don't have one in your workplace, it's something that we would want to see included in there, because although it isn't a mental health condition in its own right, it still clearly has a huge impact on how people feel on a day-to-day basis. So as well as not being able to discriminate against a worker because of a disability, there is also a legal duty for the employer to make reasonable adjustments, which again, I'm sure is a phrase that you're familiar with. We don't always think about them as related to mental ill health, but they absolutely should be. So if a mental health condition is going to fall under that definition of disability we talked about, that worker has a right, the employer, to make reasonable adjustments. Now, these aren't as straightforward as physical disability. You know, if you have a wheelchair user in your workplace, and it's reasonably obvious what reasonable adjustments need to happen in order for them to be able to do their job. With mental illness and the fluctuating nature of it and the very personalized nature of it, it isn't actually as obvious. So lots of things could be negotiated. It might be, but are certainly not limited to, that this person needs to change their location of work or is allowed to work from home. It might be that policies and procedures need to be changed or created. It might be that they need extra time off. That might be for doctor's appointments. It might be for counselling appointments. It might just be because they need more time off without the pressure of the kind of triggers, the kind of capability triggers that are quite often in sickness policies. They might need flexible working. They might need a change to their role or parts of their role. And of course, we would hope that the employer would be offering counselling or mentoring. And, you know, I do think that employee assistance programs, sometimes people are a little bit suspicious about them because they are run by the employer. But quite often it is an outside agency that is dealing with that. And, you know, I think we should be encouraging members to be using those services, because if we don't, then it will go, basically. And, you know, there are always confidentiality clauses. And of course, occupational health, I haven't mentioned it in the slides, but also have a hugely important role to play in terms of supporting those workers who are experiencing mental health problems. So I'm just aware of time, so I'm just going to whiz through the next bit. There's loads of things that union reps can do. I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm going to move on just to talk very briefly about work-related stress. So stress is not in itself a mental health condition, but it is obviously impacted by mental health, massively so. Quite often, people with stress, work-related stress, will experience anxiety or depression. And we know, those of you who might be safety reps, stress comes up in the top 3 hazards in the safety rep survey every single year. So we think about hazards as being, you know, I don't know, trip hazards or problems in that way. Actually, stress, we think, causes 30 to 40% of sickness absence. And don't forget, so many of it is going under the radar, undiagnosed, sick notes saying something different, saying back problems or saying stomach problems or things like that. So actually, that is probably a massive underestimate of what is going on. So in terms of the law, you will know that, you know, employers have a duty of care to ensure the health, safety and welfare of all of their employees, and that includes mental health. So it's the welfare side of things that we don't always think about. But employers have a legal duty to ensure that. So they should be doing anything that they can to improve the welfare of those workers. And of course, we know that the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations require the employers to carry out suitable and sufficient risk assessments, and that includes around mental health. Okay, and in my opinion, at the minute, I will talk about stress risk assessments very briefly. Again, something that is not known very much about when I come across different workplaces. I'm in quite a privileged position because I deal with a lot of different workplaces. Quite often, employers don't know how to do a stress risk assessment. They don't know what it is. Some employers, so those of you who work for the NHS and these kind of big employers, might well have their own template of a stress risk assessment. Go away from this session, not on a Saturday, but when you're back in work, and find it. Have a look, see if you can find it on your intranet. And if there isn't one, then the health and safety executive have one. And essentially, in the same way as any other risk assessment, stress risk assessments are about identifying the hazard and trying to work out what they're going to do to make it better. Okay, so let me just briefly explain that. So hopefully, for those of you who already know this, this is a bit of a refresher. We do have, I'm not going to do all of that, kind of mention that, we do have something called the Health and Safety Executive Management Standards. And again, I can send this out to Jen with the PowerPoint if that's useful. And there are 6 areas that basically cause work-related stress. And any stress risk assessment should have questions around trying to unpick what it is that is causing that stress. So the question should be around things like demands. So is it about workload? Is it about work patterns? We've mentioned control. If you remember when we talked about good mental health, how much say do you have in the way that you do your work? And for anyone who's ever been micromanaged, that is incredibly stressful, incredibly stressful. Do we have enough support? So as well as a bit of praise, a bit of encouragement, do we also have the resources that we need to do our jobs? Again, can't stop thinking about the NHS and the fact that, you know, they don't have the right PPE, they don't have the right gloves to be able to do like intimate procedures and stuff. Healthcare workers, you know, who also don't have the resources to do their job, that could easily be a cause of work-related stress. Thinking about relationships in the workplace, is there conflict? That could be between a manager and a worker, it could be between worker and worker, you know, but that is going to potentially cause work-related stress. It might be about someone's role, whether or not they understand it. And of course, something that we're all familiar with, unfortunately, organisational change, restructures, redundancies, not just it happening, but how is it communicated? So you can imagine when we're doing stress risk assessments, sometimes it's more than one of these factors causing the work-related stress. And as union reps and as shop stewards, etc., we have a supportive role to play with those members. Maybe, you know, sitting down with them, doing the stress risk assessment before they actually sit in front of the employer, just so they can start thinking about it. Because the other thing that we do that's so important is people with mental health issues and experiencing work-related stress are not going to be the most lucid, clear, kind of clear-minded people to be able to say, this is what I need in the workplace. All right, so we have a supportive role to play in that, because we might need to kind of coax things out of them, discuss options with them, and really kind of understand, you know, what is causing that stress. And don't forget, it's the employer who has a legal duty to do something about it. So we can come up with solutions, we can come up with ideas, but that isn't actually our responsibility. Okay, they have a legal duty to do that. I know I've said that a lot. I can see there are some messages in the chat. I promise you I will come to them as soon as we've finished and reply to them. So just very, very briefly to finish, because I know I'm nearly out of time. And I've covered quite a lot in a short amount of time. I'm not going to go through this now, because I think you probably know what causes stress. But some things that I would love you to think about as a committee, maybe as a branch, maybe as a workplace. You know, where do we go with this? You know, how do we support members with mental health issues? How do we support women with mental health issues? Do you hold regular meetings for members with mental health issues? Because let's be clear, they are the best people to tell you what they are experiencing in the workplace and what they need. You know, do you have disability committees? Are we sure that members with mental health issues are actually engaging in those as well? Because not everybody with a mental health issue considers themselves to have a disability. Are there members in your workplace with mental health issues that can go to those meetings? What support and training is available? You know, is the employer going to give them time off to attend those? Who else could we get potentially involved? So I suppose I just wanted to kind of set some things for you to be thinking about in terms of creating a culture in the workplace and in our branches where mental health is talked about, taken seriously, and people are being listened to. So I'm going to just whiz through the final bits, a bit about campaigning. I must advertise this because it would be remiss of me not to. This is the programme that I'm working on with the TUC, the Northwest TUC that I mentioned earlier. The next session we're doing is on Wednesday, the 4th of August at 4:30. It's about violence and post-traumatic stress disorder in the workplace. So, because we're looking at different mental health issues that impact workers. So if you're interested, you can sign up to the Northwest TUC newsletter. I'll put the link there, or you can follow them on Twitter, or you can follow me on Twitter, and we'll advertise those. But you're very welcome to come to those. I think you're all based in the Northwest anyway, but you know, even people outside the Northwest are very welcome to those sessions. I've put some resources on there just to pull out one or two. I've mentioned Mental Health Foundation. That's the one at the top, mentalhealth.org.uk. The other couple that I would really like to highlight, Hub of Hope is an app and a website. It's brilliant. If you are looking to access mental health services for you or for one of your members, you put in a postcode and it tells you what services are available in that area. And you can filter by things like suicidal ideations, or self-harming, or depression, or whatever. Really good website. The other thing I would highlight is Zero Suicide Alliance, who are an absolutely brilliant charity. You have some free online training. It takes about 30 to 45 minutes. The only thing I would say is make sure you're feeling well enough to do that training before you do it. But it's about how to have conversations with people who are having suicidal thoughts, and it's excellent. I can't honestly recommend it enough. So, you know, it would be great if you think about going and doing that, and if you think it's worthwhile, taking it to your employer and seeing if they can give that some time for your co-workers to do that. And I've put a link. A lot of the stuff that I've kind of taken is from TUC, an excellent TUC resource, which used to be a physical booklet called Mental Health in the Workplace, and is now available as a PDF online, and that is that link there. So apologies, I know I've proper motored through and gone 3 minutes over, but I really am happy to take any questions. And what I'll do is I will put my email address in the chat. So if you want to get in touch, please do. But I'm pleased to report I'm now on leave for 2 weeks. So I will be lying on the beach in Anglesey next week. So you won't get me in the next couple of weeks, but I would absolutely get back to you after that. So thank you very much for having me, and enjoy the rest of your conference. And like I say, happy to take any questions. I know we've not really got time, but I am, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Oh my, there's just so much information there to take in. But she will send the slides over to Jen, and Jen will circulate those after the meeting today. Is there anyone that has got some questions that they want to ask, or are you happy for us to send those across to Janet with a response after your holiday? Are you going anywhere nice?
So next week I'll be in Anglesey at my partner's parents, and then the week after that I'm just planning on lying face down for a week.
Have an absolutely amazing time. I can't see any questions.
There's just one question there, Sharon. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat.
I know, I'm
you're
trying to get through.
Karen Naramore just asked, what was the case again that you referred to, please?
I can't remember the actual name of it. So what I will do is when I send this, well, Jen already has the slide, but I will send to Jen. I will dig out the actual reference and send that through. So I'm really sorry, I can't remember it off the top of my head.
Brilliant.
Poor planning.
Thank you.
I can see Michelle is waving.
Yeah, sorry, Janet. I've put my mobile phone number in the chat for you. I'd sent it privately, actually. I'd just like a quick chat with you, if I could, about one of our members who's really struggling.
Yeah, of course, no problem.
I just wanted a bit of advice from you, really.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I don't want to kind of step on anyone's toes.
No, I know.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. What I'll do, Michelle, is I'll just send you my number now, and if you want to give me a ring later on, that's absolutely fine.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Janet. Wow. I think we'll take a comfort break now till about 11:30, if that's okay with everybody. Go and get yourselves a nice brew. No gin and teas. We do have an afternoon session. So I hope you don't like one, but yeah, stick to water this morning, please. See you all back here at 11:30.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'm going to dive out.
Thanks so much, Janet.
Enjoy the rest of it. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Oh, have you managed to get it out? Oh. Oh, right, okay. Okay, thanks everybody for coming back so promptly. Oh, sorry, I just done my dog's toe. I'd just like to thank our speakers from this morning. I forgot before, to Aileen, Leslie and Janet. I feel really moved by the speakers that we've had today. And yeah, I mean, it's quite, oh, I've found the agenda. Okay, the country clapped for care workers, nurses and school support staff during COVID, but many of them couldn't afford to eat. Michelle McHale, the trustee at Manchester South Central Food Bank, will talk about her dedication to supporting families out of food poverty and what recovery out of COVID means in real terms, quoting from a national report by the Trussell Trust. Leslie Lancelot will also provide an insight into what it means to build anti-poverty neighbourhoods. Together, they will demonstrate why clapping doesn't feed us. Grand gestures mean nothing when people are going to bed hungry. So I'd like to introduce Michelle and then Leslie to talk to us about the poverty and food banks. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sharon. I'm going to share my screen. Oh. I'm going to try. Sorry, I'm not brilliant with this. Here we go. I'm hoping everybody can see this because I can't see you now. But I'm just going to crack on till somebody tells me not to. So Michelle and I are going to talk to you about why clapping doesn't feed anybody. And who says it doesn't? Well, Michelle McHale, who's a trustee of Bridging the Gap Manchester South Central Food Bank, will tell you that. And I'm the partnership manager of our Manchester Food Partnership. I work for Manchester City Council here in a personal trade union capacity today. So the overview is quite simple. COVID hasn't gone away, and it's not going to. We've seen during the pandemic the use of food banks increased in 12 months massively. I'm sorry, I'm being hesitant because I can't see my notes. Anyway, so cracking on. I did a snapshot at the end of June, the week commencing 21st of June. Within the partnership, there's in excess of 50 food banks, but I got a snapshot from 20 food banks, and they fed 3,265 households just in Manchester, just 20 food banks across the city in 1 week. And what we're finding is financial hardship and not COVID is driving people to food banks. So I'm going to throw this over to Michelle. I'm going to have to stop sharing because I can't see what's going on. Oops, sorry.
I think we're going to have to share it, Leslie. Sorry.
Sorry, say that again.
I think you're going to have to share it your end.
Right.
Are you okay, Leslie? I think if I'm right, Michelle's asking you to share the document and Michelle will talk. Is that right?
Yes, please.
Right,
yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense, Leslie.
Okay. Yes. So we've got down to, hang on, it was this one. Is that okay?
Can't see anything at the moment, Leslie.
We can't, yeah.
Oh, sorry, that was Liz.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I thought the screen was changing.
Do you want me to just talk while we're figuring it out?
Yeah, well, if you can, Michelle, that'd be great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
No, that's fine. Okay, so I'm Michelle McHale. I'm a trustee of Bridging the Gap, who operates Manchester South Central Food Bank. I'm an unpaid member of staff. I was initially invited to join the chair of trustees, invited to join the board of trustees rather, to kind of help set up and develop the food banks. Obviously back in 2014 it was a new concept, and you know, it was a group of community members had come together to look at kind of setting up some sort of food provision, being that we're based in one of the most deprived wards in Manchester. So I was asked to just come in and help them to navigate and steer the food bank forward. And obviously, you know, how many years later I'm still here, still doing it. But yeah, so that's just a little bit about me. My background is youth and community work, community development and education. So kind of worked within health, worked within education with both adults and young people, so kind of got a kind of wide spectrum of experience. I think for us, kind of as an emergency feed provider, prior to the pandemic, we were working from, thank you Leslie, we were working from 2 distribution centres, delivering twice a week within the community, with 1 paid member of staff who coordinated our food donations, so basically ran our warehouse. the project management side of the food bank was pretty much run by the trustees, primarily myself, just because we didn't have the funding to bring in other members of staff at that time. But what we did do is kind of relied on really a large number of volunteers that worked alongside myself to kind of make sure that we had everything in place to run the distribution sessions and provide the emergency food that we needed to provide to people at those times. We had quite healthy stock reserves, so stock wasn't a real issue for us pre-pandemic. However, COVID hit and yeah, everything went against the wall, so to speak. So in order to kind of cope with the pressures of the pandemic, what we ended up doing is closing one of our distribution centres and centralising it all at one base, just because it was very much easier then to coordinate things. Across our 2 distribution centres, we had, one of our centres was based in St Edmund's Church in Whalley Range, and the volunteers there were primarily like the older ladies from church that wanted to volunteer and, you know, wanted to kind of get at the house and not be lonely and isolated themselves. So obviously used to volunteer at the food bank. So once the pandemic hit, we kind of quickly realised that this group of volunteers would have to self-isolate for lots of different reasons, and therefore it was too risky to keep that centre open. So yeah, we took the decision to temporarily close it. What we also had to do is, because referrals were coming in thick and fast from everywhere, is we had to obviously update all of our risk assessments, look at all of our rotas, what we were doing when we were doing it. We tried to social distance clients outside of the building and still do that face-to-face work, but being the clients that we were working with, none of them social isolated outside. They all congregated and gathered together, and we felt as a food provider that that was too risky. Which meant then that our only other option was to find some sort of provision or means of moving towards a delivery model of service. But when you've not got any kind of, you know, real paid staff, and you've never had to work that delivery model before, it meant that we had to like quickly change everything that we were doing. We had to put in funding applications to try and secure a vehicle. So COVID had a real impact on us as an organisation at a time when people needed us the most. What we saw during COVID is that we had like 75% increase of people coming and approaching us for food support, which impacted then on our food reserves. So our stock levels became practically non-existent at one point, and we were using what little funding we had to go and do cash and carry runs, which, you know, myself alongside the other trustees were just going to the cash and carry, loading up our cars, bringing it back, putting it in parcels, and it was going straight back out the door again. So yeah, it was quite a mammoth task in terms of kind of how we were pre-pandemic and how we've had to change and develop consistently as we've gone through the pandemic. In order to do the food delivery side of things, what it meant is that we had to work in greater partnership with other agencies. So where our referral agencies had staff or volunteers that could offer a delivery service for their particular clients that they were referring, we set up working arrangements with them. And it also meant that we forged a greater relationship with Manchester City Council, who also provided us with access to volunteer drivers and acted as a referral service into the food bank as well. So yeah, for us, it's just been a manic kind of 12-18 months. I'm not quite sure how we've done what we've done, but we've kind of come through. But yeah.
You can come in.
Keep going, Shell.
Yeah, do you want to just move to the next slide, Leslie? Yeah, what we what we always say to people is that poverty can affect anybody at any given time, and the causes are often complex and multi-layered. So it's not just simply that somebody hasn't got food in their cupboards, there's always something else, a precursor that has led to that. So often it is those changes in circumstances, and as kind of Eileen and Janet this morning have spoken about, you know, people finding themselves suddenly being a lone parent, you know, somebody who, you know, has been experiencing domestic violence and suddenly had to flee. You know, it could be that someone's had, you know, a breakdown in mental health and well-being and is unable to work, and those tend to then be the triggers that escalate to the point that, you know, there's a change in income and therefore they've not got as much income or no income at all, which kind of then leads them down the road into needing food bank support. Through the pandemic, we saw more people coming to us with that had been placed on furlough, and people that had lost their jobs, people that had been made redundant. And, you know, these are people that were prior to the pandemic quite financially viable as a unit. But suddenly when you're faced with that loss of income and you've got a choice between paying your mortgage or putting food on the table, which option do you take? So yeah, it's just been very difficult for some people. Yeah. Thank you, Leslie. So during the pandemic, one aspect of our work that did increase was work around kind of domestic violence. And we saw obviously a significant increase throughout the pandemic, where we were supporting more and more people, more and more women that had been subjected to some form of domestic violence. So throughout the pandemic, we supported a number of women through Trafford Rape Crisis, through Women's Aid, and other referral agencies. In some cases, it was quite difficult to work with those individuals because some of them were still living at home with their violent partners, and it meant that we had to really be careful around the work that we did and how we approached them. For some of the women, they were applying for food, but when their partner wasn't around and didn't want their partner to know that they'd come to a food bank. We were having to deliver parcels when the partner was out so that he didn't know that somebody had been to the house. So there was all of those issues that were impacting on kind of how and when women had access to food support. But one of the case studies, one of the women that kind of stuck out the most to us was a woman who had chronic mental health issues. She'd had a recent diagnosis of cancer. Her child had been removed into care as a result of consistent breakdowns within her personal relationships with her partner. So there was domestic violence there. There was no family support. So obviously, because of the issue that this woman found herself in, the family had kind of just moved away from her, and she felt very, very much isolated in this abusive relationship. The partner was also financially abusing her by taking her benefits money off her, which then was spent on drug and alcohol. So obviously there was addiction issues. And obviously because of her ill health, what we realised is that actually she wasn't on the right type or right amount of benefits. That was having an impact on her as well. So, you know, all of that led to her ending up coming to a food bank for support. So, you know, when we're saying, you know, that food poverty is multi-layered and it's complex, I think this case study just kind of screams that in a sense, because this woman had so many things, aspects of her life that were just in disarray, that she didn't know whether she was coming or going, never mind where her next meal was coming from. Yeah. This particular woman came to us through a self-referral. It was somebody that was known to us that we had worked with previously, so we weren't starting from scratch with this woman. We had some of the background information. However, through the pandemic, we were able to unpick more of kind of the issues that were forcing her to come to the food bank. And I think because we'd built up that trusting relationship with her over a period of time, she felt that she was able to kind of get to the crux of what was going on for her at that moment in time when she self-referred back to us. So the way that we supported her was, you know, we provided an emergency feed parcel in the interim just to make sure that she did have food. We signposted her to a local referral agency that we work with very, very closely and kind of co-case manage cases together, which meant then that between the two agencies that we could both share the responsibility of making sure that this woman was looked after and had access to the right types of services as well. So yeah, lots of joint working. One of the issues that we had is like the food bank is based in Manchester, although we do work in Trafford, but the referral agency that we co-worked with was a Manchester-based organisation. So it also meant working across the border with agencies within the Trafford area to make sure that this woman was linked in with those Trafford services as well, just so that she had more access to services across a wider area, just to make sure that she had a service that she was able to access and feel comfortable accessing. Yeah, I've kind of touched on some of this in terms of, you know, yes, the food bank had a 75% overall increase in food bank use. And when we speak about kind of the increase in food bank use prior to the pandemic, in the year prior to the pandemic, we probably gave out about between 73 and 75 tons of food. So which would be equivalent of kind of 87,000 meals. Post-pandemic, with the 75% increase, we gave out, I think it was 178 tons of food, which would have fed, you know, kind of 178,000 meals thereabouts. So it kind of just demonstrates how, you know, quickly the speed and the momentum of the pandemic kind of hit food banks. You know, and it's yeah, it's not been an easy task. It's been very, very exhausting. Our staff have had like a week off at Christmas. However, for myself, I was still manning the emergency phone lines, and, you know, on New Year's Eve, found myself working alongside Leslie and the local ward councillors going out to support a woman in crisis who was a woman with a number of children, who had a COVID diagnosis, child with disabilities, who was the eldest child trying to look after the younger siblings within the household. So there was a whole kind of package of work and support that had to quickly be put together to support that individual kind of family. And as the pandemic went on, what we found is that actually we couldn't run the service on the staff that we currently had, which meant that we had to find money, apply for money to get other members of staff to come in and support us. So, you know, post-pandemic, we had one warehouse worker, and suddenly now we've got a project manager, we've still got our warehouse coordinator, and we've got 2 warehouse assistants who help with bringing in donations and doing our delivery, as well as our team of volunteers. So, you know, for us, it was tiring because we were constantly having to change and adapt what we do and think about how could we do things better, how can we work smarter and not harder. It still is primarily relying on volunteers and the goodwill of volunteers. you know, we've got a board of 7 trustee members who all do get involved on the ground, as well as sit on the boards and do kind of the strategy and planning aspects of the work. You know, I think the general public think we collect food in and we give food out, and that's our role, but actually it's so much more than that, because what we want to provide is that holistic wraparound support and make sure that people are supported, not just with food, but that actually we're getting to the crux of the issues as to what has led them to the food bank in the first place. So making sure we're unpicking whatever the issues are and signposting them to the appropriate services to be able to address those issues, because it's only when we address those issues can we actually really lift people out of poverty. So in terms of the future, we've got a long way to go, because I know I'm going to leave it there, Leslie, because I think we're going to come back to that bit.
Yeah, thanks Michelle. I just want to reiterate to people that Michelle isn't a paid worker for the food bank. She probably puts in more than a full-time equivalent of a full-time job every week, but is a volunteer and is a trustee at the charity as well. In the last slide, where Michelle's saying food banks do not have a statutory duty to feed people, actually there is no stat duty to provide food. There's nothing in law that says anybody has to provide food. Challenging the causes of food poverty isn't a statutory duty either, but responding to the impact is. So homelessness, for instance, is a result of poverty. Children being taken into care primarily is underwritten by poverty. Poor mental health, domestic violence, all impacted on by poverty, and responding to those impacts costs a lot of money. So if we could take some of that money, and I'm going to have to see if I can, hang on, because I want to read you my notes. Right, and there are none there. I'm really sorry about this, sisters. Anyway, in Manchester, we had a family poverty strategy pre-pandemic, because we recognised that poverty is an issue and costs local authorities an awful lot of money. However, the pandemic has impacted on that strategy, and we've had a refresh. I want to give you a case study. Michelle and I came to put this together separately, if you like, and it's either a coincidence or it's an indication of just how much domestic violence occurs in our communities, because my case study is also about domestic violence, and it's a woman that I dealt with myself, so I know her circumstances. She's a nurse, a UNISON member, one of our sisters. In 2019, she was in a settled but a troubled relationship. She was working enhanced shifts to get extra pay, but also to be out of the house at evenings, weekends, and during the night, to reduce the tension in the relationship. And in 2020, she caught COVID because she was nursing on a COVID ward. She recovered from the initial illness, but she developed long COVID and couldn't work. So she's a full-time NHS worker. She got sick pay, excuse me, but she got it at the basic rate, so no enhancements, and the impact of the reduction of income put more pressure on the relationship. The relationship broke down because there was an increase of domestic abuse and violence. Turns out she was left with the family debt and basic sick pay, so she couldn't afford food. And one of the things that she said to me over and over that really resonated with me was, she said, I never ever, as a worker, I never ever thought I'd be in this situation. Never. I'm not prepared for it. I don't know how to deal with it. And that really resonated with me, and I could really feel that she could be any of us. She could be me, she could be you, she could be any of us. What we did was I referred her to a food bank. I made sure she got deliveries at home because she was really unwell with long COVID. Referred her to CAB so that she got support around managing her debts, and actually CAB were able to work with her to contact the people that she was in debt to, and she got an awful lot of it written off. Not all of it, and she's still struggling, but she's in a better place now than she was previously. These are the notes that I wanted to see, because the politics of poverty are really important, because being poor is not exclusive to those living on out of work benefits. And a 9-month inquiry by the Health Foundation charity found that poor people were almost 4 times as likely to die of COVID as those in the wealthiest areas. And we know, because we see it, that those the people who live in the poorest areas live closer together in smaller houses, in more overcrowded conditions, do the poorest paid jobs, and have a disproportionately high representation from BAME communities. And those people are almost 4 times as likely to die of COVID than those in the wealthiest areas. The inquiry's chair said that the country needs to aim for a recovery that builds on economic and social resilience and addresses the needs of groups who've experienced the most damaging impacts of the pandemic. I hate the word resilience personally, because I feel it shifts the responsibility for the ills of the world onto the individual, and lets governments off the hook, quite frankly. The truth is, our members are relying on food banks because of the government's austerity programme. In 2020, the Resolution Foundation forecast that average real pay, that's our take-home pay, taking into account inflation, last year they forecast that our pay would fall back below 2004-05 levels by the end of the year. They said that the average pay of public sector workers would be £1,700 lower in 2020 than it was in 2010. And we know, because we see it all day, every day in our working lives and in our family lives, that this is the result of a deliberate and calculated attack on our working conditions and on the lives of our members. So if you're poor, you're relying on food banks. If you're poor, you're 4 times more likely to die of COVID-19. If you're poor, you're in work and you're keeping those frontline services open. So if you're poor, you need a union, because charity is no solution to poverty.
So what are if charity isn't the solution, then what are the solutions? How do people get out of or take themselves out of poverty? and whose responsibility is it to make the changes needed? And I think these are questions that, you know, we have to kind of keep working at and working on in order to improve the situations for the many, many people that are consistently struggling in poverty. Yeah.
So we've got examples of networking, how networking has improved over the course of the pandemic. Our Manchester Food Partnership is a collaboration of food providers, food banks, community pantries, people who do cooked meals, but also social housing providers, NHS members, and we're coming together. So, for example, Michelle and I, well, Michelle is a driving force, I have to say, in this, but I'm working with her on setting up a human Moss Side community partnership that links to our Manchester Food Partnership, excuse me. And the whole point of the network is that we're pulling together in some sort of formal structure all of the agencies that work in human Moss Side to provide that wraparound support for people. So it's very much collaboration between the local authority and the VCS, creating networks for change. It's not enough to just feed people. And I think that's the point. We need to develop recovery pathways that include money management and signpost people out of debt and poverty. And to do that, it's very much a bottom-up, top-down approach to policy making. Looking for the lines and the links to local and national government to influence effective changes. And I think that the partnership is doing that. The Manchester City Council are now seriously looking at launching our Manchester Food Partnership as a standalone entity so that it can be commissioned by the City Council. And we're looking at monitoring so that we can create not just numbers but case studies to influence policy and influence change in a real way.
I think it's also, sorry to put in there, Leslie, but I think it's also important to say how all of these different strategy groups at kind of local and council level are all kind of linking in with one another now, which obviously we didn't have that before. So the group that I sit in links in with the group that Leslie and I sit in, and so on and so on. And I think by hopefully working in that way, what we get is that collaborative working and a more kind of sustainable approach to supporting the community, but sustainable not just for individual community members, but for us as organisations as well, because by working collaboratively, what we can do is work out what support and resources are in our community to support the people that we're working with and how we work together to share those resources. So I think it's a really, really good move going forward. And I think it's, you know, if no one has a statutory duty to feed people, then how do we do it? And I think we can only do it by collaboratively working together and pushing for those changes to make food a statutory obligation.
Yeah, sorry about this. I just wanted to make this full screen. So the first four points on this slide we've talked about, but what can we do? What can we do as women in unison? We can challenge poverty and the causes of poverty. We know that the Equal Pay Act came in how long ago? Far longer than any of us want to recognise, I think, but we're still having to fight for a living wage. We're still having to fight for decent pay for our members. So we have to carry on doing that. We have to support the demand for a bill on food as a human right. and we have to carry on fighting for change that recognises and rewards frontline staff in the work that they do. And by doing that, we'll be fighting for an end to poverty. So we wanted to come up with something to finish off this this presentation, and Michelle came up with these words that I thought were just fantastic. So unity is strength. Where there's teamwork and collaboration, wonderful things can happen, and we've seen this. Michelle alluded to New Year's Eve when in her first part of the presentation. I was on duty. I'm a paid worker, and I was on duty that day. And I got a phone call from the one of our local councillors, and also from Michelle. Leanne, the councillor, had been contacted by the friend of the woman that Michelle talked about before. And what happened then was I did my bit from the safety and security of my office in the spare bedroom. Michelle went from her home to the food bank, put a parcel together and took it round herself to the family home. And Asda had given the food bank staff a sort of goodie basket to say thank you for the work that they do helping people. And Michelle put that, all of that, because it was full of chocolates and sweets and stuff like that, and there were kids in the house, and it's just nice to have something as a treat. And Michelle took that round. So wonderful things can and do happen at a local level. Unity to our neighbourhoods through intercommunication in order to provide succour and appropriate options to lift people out of poverty, whilst remembering to negotiate for effective change is actually the key. And if you look at the left-hand side, we're in unison, in unity in our neighbourhoods. We fight for inclusion and sustainability. We look for options for people, and we negotiate for change. And that's it. And I don't know where I'm up to now. Right. How do I stop share?
All right, Leslie.
I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry, conference, for the nightmare. And I don't know if you're aware, but halfway through that, firstly, my doorbell went, and I had to nip downstairs because it was some new bedside cabinets that were being delivered. And secondly, the cat walked across, jumped on the window ledge and jumped down onto my computer and knocked the presentation off. I am sorry.
Leslie, you've got nothing to be sorry for. That was an absolutely excellent and fantastic. Oh God, I'm just getting so worked up today. Not worked up, that's emotional today. Both yourself and Michelle, that was an absolutely fantastic speech, and I don't think any of us could have done it any better.
Definitely not. I absolutely agree. And I loved the way that you ended it. But I wonder, you know, not just now, but perhaps during the lunch break, you could leave up that slide before that last one. And it had all, you know, the colourful one, and it had the different suggestions. Because what I'm going to say is, yeah, I was absolutely overwhelmed with what you're saying. I mean, you'll see I've been wiping my tears. I had to go off camera a few times, because it really touched my heart, because these people have been me at times of my life. You know, I'm very, very happy that that is not now my situation, but having gone through some of that, I never forget. That's why I fight for a lot of the things I fight for. They are no longer my situation, but I never forget that experience. And I think that is what is incumbent on all of us, to take it in on that personal level. And what you did at the New Year, Michelle, I mean, it just showed it's that attitude to things. I'm not so sure about you never being paid for all of this. I mean, that's another issue for me, because I think, you know what? The invisible society that is working for this current world and society we live in, it's a disgrace. If you actually put it into money terms, you know, so
Yeah.
you comment.
No, thank you. I think for me, yes, I'm a volunteer at the food bank, but I actually came out of employment to take on care responsibilities.
Yeah.
So I had two family members that I was caring for. My grandmother, who obviously passed away just before the pandemic, and obviously I'm a carer for my husband. So actually the food bank, strangely, is respite for me. I know that might sound really weird, but it's that respite from dealing with my issues and my problems as a carer, and having those responsibilities and helping somebody else with theirs. And I think, you know, we were talking before about kind of, you know, mental health and the impact that that can have on people. And I think for food banks, I think we don't recognise that actually listening to somebody's stories or several stories consistently throughout the day, like we have done in the pandemic, that, you know, there's been times where I've been sat here in tears thinking, gosh, what am I going to do with this family? Who am I going to turn to for help and support? And, you know, I think COVID has had a real impact on everybody, you know, not just the community, but the services that are running them.
Absolutely.
And, you know, as you say, we've got this invisible workforce that kind of props up and keeps the country running. And actually, if we made food a statutory duty, would that take the pressure off this invisible workforce?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's why we support you. And, you know, and another thanks to Leslie for that. Please, I can't even imagine that you came out of that presentation saying, I apologise, it was storming. It was absolutely spectacular. I mean, you know, and for me, I think as a strategist, I want to see what we can do. You know, I'm an action person. I want to know, how can I hear it and go away and do something? Because I think what we can do, we can come to these kind of conferences, can't we? And you get all fired up whilst you're in there, and then it happened, and then it's Sunday and you're doing what you do, and then it's Monday and you're back to work. But what did you carry through? And that is a real issue, I think, for all of us, because yes, we're busy, but it's sometimes because we can't grasp what it is that we can do, what's capable for us to do. And that's why I'm asking you to put that other list back up. I don't know if you can, because people then, if you can identify yourself into one of those bullet points, sometimes, you know, that will help, is that people sort of to really realize, outside of looking at, oh, that's those people, they're the ones who do that, they're somehow special, they got brought into this earth with a special glow around them that meant that when they hear things that you've got to respond to in society, they know just what to do. I'd never know how to do something like that. And we as women say that a lot. You know, I'd never know, that's not me, I couldn't do what you do. But actually, we all can, if we hear things in a way that's active. So that's all I wanted to say at the back of that.
Just before we finish.
Sorry, Leslie, can I just do a correction on kind of the figures, because I didn't have the exact figures in front of me and I was trying to remember them off the top of my head. So in terms of in terms of the 2019-20, we distributed 33 tons of food, which was equivalent to just over 78,000 meals. In 2021, with the 75% increase, we distributed 79.5 tons of food, which was equivalent to like over 187,000 meals. So just to make sure we've got that corrected there. But obviously the rest of the information Leslie's dropped into the chat for people.
I did it because I wanted to put it into context of people, of human beings. And we're just talking about one food bank in Hume in Manchester. So these aren't citywide figures. These are just for Hume, and not just, but it is only Manchester South Central Food Bank that these represent. So in 2019-20, the school holiday food programme that they delivered, they fed 331 children and 239 adults. Last year, they fed 2,532 children and 1,907 adults throughout the summer holidays. That's the level of need that exists in our society. And I just want to finish, because I know we're going to go to lunch now, by saying that if anybody in the room today feels that they need to use a food bank, please do. Don't go hungry. No one should go to bed hungry in our society. And if you know of anybody who needs to use a food bank, please refer them, because it's more than food that they're going to get. They're going to get a level of help and support that lifts people up and help build them back up again from the point that they're at. And if anybody wants to have a chat with me about any of this, here's my email.
So as you're doing that, then can we say thank you very, very much for coming? As you know, we already took the decision this morning. Sharon led the putting forward of our donation that will be going to the food bank. You did, Sharon, didn't you? And that was unanimous. And I have to let you know that personally, from this women's committee, if we could turn over 5,000, because it was in our budget, we would. We have a maximum amount of £50 that we can give, because we have only 4 organisations we're allowed to give to. So if you would take that £50 donation in the spirit of we gave you the maximum we could give you, and if we can find a way to increase that amount, you know, through other means, through the council, we will do. But I think the thing that we can do is talk about it within our other committees where we are, regional committee, regional council, and then all the branches hear that, and then you get it, you know, there are 114 general, correct me if I'm wrong, branches across the northwest that, you know, all could be able to give you that donation or actually increase it. So that's what we try and do. And that's, I suppose, the influence of the region. So at that, it's really given me food for thought and actually disturbed me emotionally, physically. I think I need a minute. And we are going into lunch. And as Sharon said, you know, she feels like she's moved. I'm the exact same. So we are going to go into lunch. We were hoping to hear from Faye Bruce from the Caribbean and African Health Network. She hasn't made it up until this point. She did come to our International Women's Day and didn't get the chance to fully present to us. But I think what we heard in a very short space of time made us almost sort of feel like, how could we have only given this subject 5 to 10 minutes? I mean, it just clearly needed longer, because as with the poverty figures, it is absolutely shocking that this current society is sitting with the fact that a Black woman is 4 times more likely to die in childbirth, and that in 2021, and it is, the figures are actually appalling. And I wanted her to be able to speak to that. She hasn't been able to make it for this section of conference, but that's what it was all about. And that's why we were bringing it to you, because in the sense of solidarity, I think it's really important that we all work together. You saw today what it means when solidarity is put into practice, from the speakers who've already been here, from Leslie being the one who penned that motion. Of course I could have. I just felt like, oh, is it going to be me again going on about racism? So it was actually, you know, it actually almost moved me to tears that she'd taken the time to want to pen a motion that I could have written myself. So I'm a great believer in solidarity. I believe we do this together, and that when I'm bringing to you the issue of Black and Asian women dying in childbirth, that I didn't even know people still sort of died in childbirth, but when you see those figures, we will distribute to them. Please don't just shut your eyes to them. Look at what it means. Look at what that means for us as a society. What does it say for us that we're happy to accept that? That are we happy to accept it? And what can we do as women? Because we tend to make the changes that actually spur on other changes legislatively. We bring the issues of poverty because we are the ones who feel that we need to take the responsibility of feeding our children. So I'll leave it there. I'll say that we are going to break at this time for lunch. I don't know if Sharon wants to add anything, Rachel or T, before we go into the lunchtime. But otherwise, if not, I think that this is an appropriate place to be able to say thank you very much for joining us this morning. I hope it's been stimulating for you. You've got the contacts for Michelle, for Leslie. They will provide what they can that we can distribute to all of you, and we will, of the slides, the information we've had today. And can everybody all return for 12:45, please? Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.
Whilst you're still there, Michelle, that glow of sainthood is very close. Thank you so very much for everything you do. For every tin of beans that goes to anyone, anywhere, I thank you.
You're welcome. It's yeah, for me, it's about being able to give back to my community. And, you know, I've come out of the workforce having kind of qualified myself in various fields, and for me, even though I'm not kind of in the field of employment at the moment, I can still give back and use the skills and talents that I've got in a hopefully in a positive way. So yeah, I enjoy doing what I'm doing.
Well, I suppose that's the plus. If you can enjoy it, you manage to get some enjoyment still from doing it. I mean, all to the good, all to the good. But I really, I like the fact that you took that time that we need really to be able to make it realistic, you know, and it is the what can I do? How can I make this be better or different? And we've got some real concrete ideas there. So that's it gives us something that if we chose as a women's committee now to make tackling poverty be our agenda for the next year, for example, that we've actually sort of got an action plan that we can work on. And that is tremendous. You know, it's just some real areas of engagement there.
If there's anything else I can do to, you know, support UNISON or its members, you know, if anybody is struggling, you know, for whatever reason, and they're not sure of who their local food bank is or who to contact, then just please do contact me and I will post them in the right direction.
Watch this space.
You know,
sorry you said that. We are known for asking for as much as we can get.
Yeah, no, we've got, you know, we're in this together, aren't we? And we've just got to kind of support everybody you know, the best that we can. And sometimes we don't have the answers and we have to go and, you know, help and support and get the answers from elsewhere. And, you know, that's us. We just kind of do as much as we can do to support people.
Yeah, lovely.
I've got to,
thank you.
I'm
Try
actually,
and get some lunch. You're leaving us now.
I am, because we've got a Tesco's food drive this week. So I'm kind of doing that and this. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to go and check on my staff and volunteers and lend a hand down at Tesco's for the rest of the afternoon. But thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for coming. Thank you. Yeah, I
Take
hope
care.
you've stirred as many people in the same way as I was, and so many others were stirred this morning. So
I think
thanks.
there's so much.
Thanks
I think me
again.
and Leslie probably could have just ran the conference on our own, just on the poverty aspect of it.
Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
there's so much more we could have said that we've had to kind of cut it short. But yeah,
Year as
thank
our
you for
theme.
inviting us.
We've actually got something we can work on.
Yeah,
We've got an actual plan, almost an action plan, to be able to go forward on things. So that's what's important about making it real and making it be more than just you know, good intentions, which I think, you know, I don't mean it critically, but all of us can have good intentions. I mean, I know this about the work of racism. It's very rare that I would say something about anti-racism and people wouldn't say, oh yeah, I'm against it. But it's like, what did you actually do about any of it? Oh, well, it's very rarely, very much, you know. So, I mean, and I'm not being mean when I say that. I'm just talking the truth, really.
yeah.
So, I mean, we wouldn't be talking about it still if people were doing something about it, you know. So we just need to do things.
You know, I think, yeah, it's, I mean, as somebody from a mixed parentage, my mother's side of the family is Irish, Nigerian Irish, and myself and my children do kind of identify with our culture and our heritage. And I think my children have, you know, the black features, but then because my son's kind of got blonde hair, he's like, well, you can't be black. And it's like, well, actually that's how he defines himself, and who is anybody else to define him differently? So we've had incidents recently where, you know, he went to an event and was told he couldn't have a leaflet because the leaflet was only for black people. So yeah, we're kind of with you on your stance against the, you know, the anti-racism work, because there's so much work needs to be done. And I think, you know, especially for the biracial you know, individuals, because sometimes we're not identified by the wider community, and we're often put into boxes that we don't belong in.
Very, very right. Oh, well, I'll speak to you more about that. Can make sure I've got your number.
Please do. Well, you can always get it through, Leslie.
Well, me and my sister were talking about it because most of my sisters have got family members that are dual heritage. So we just said that it's been a really interesting time. It's been hard for people with their white partners. And it's a big issue that needs to be spoken about, isn't being supported. It needs to be being spoken about because people aren't being supported in those positions. And that's the problem. So we do have to do something, and we'll.
Right, I'm going to shoot. So thank you for the invite, and hopefully I'll speak to you again at some point in the future.
Yep, we'll get together again.
All right, take care.
All right,
Bye.
thank you. I'll be coming to you for that case study.
Yeah, no worries. All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, does anybody mind if I just try and share my screen before we kick off again? I hope that worked.
You all right, Gemma?
Oh, sorry, I was just saying, I was just trying to share my screen. I don't know if it worked. It doesn't seem to show you on your side, does it?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay. Let me just try again and see if it worked. Does that work?
That certainly does, Gemma.
Oh, fabulous. Right, I'll clear that off. Or I'll try. My computer's having a bit of a meltdown, quite literally.
Today. It keeps saying something about internet, but it's unstable.
Oh no. Oh, see, mine's overheated. I had to run and get ice packs and stick them under. So I'm wearing ice packs and the laptop is wearing ice packs. So here's hoping it doesn't all end in tears.
Yeah. Okay, I think we'll make a start because the majority of us are now back. Okay, it's a shame Dr. Faye Bruce couldn't join us today, but she's actually been called into work. But Jen's kindly put some information in the chat facility if you'd like to have a look at it. I'd now like to introduce our next guest speaker, which is Gemma, a research fellow at the University of Central Lancashire. and she will provide an interactive session on women's experiences during and after the pandemic. So over to you, please, Gemma.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for inviting me today, and I'm just going to pop the slides on for you. Okay, I hope that worked. So yeah, I'm going to be looking at kind of the impact on Corona on working women, and I'm going to be exploring it specifically through the experiences of those who are returners after a care break, and also the victims and survivors of domestic abuse. So just to give a kind of trigger warning, as we had earlier, you know, we'll be discussing cases of domestic abuse and challenging situations. So of course, please feel free to leave if you need to at any point, and there will be resources provided at the end. And so we, the kind of wider teams outlined on the slides, have undertaken research into both of these groups of workers, and we'll be using it in today's discussions. And apologies, my computer is overheating as much as I am, so it does not want to play ball, but let's hope it will keep going for a little bit. So, I mean, we've heard a lot about the impacts of Corona on women in work already today, and you know, it's very clear that this has been disadvantaging for women during Corona in terms of our careers, our earnings, our safety, our well-being. The Women's Equality Party highlight that it's deepened pre-existing inequalities, and that's been reinforced so much this morning, particularly by Liz for Black and Brown women, by Eileen for the extreme challenges to single mothers, also around, you know, women who are pregnant or already mothers. And we've seen a lack of government support during or for the future. It's been very explicit that women remain the dominant caregivers, and like we said, the extreme challenges for single mothers, but for many people trying to manage care and work responsibilities, particularly when care outside the house was unavailable. We've seen those really long hours that people are having to work. I think, it's been widely quoted, hasn't it, that working mums are expected to somehow do 23 hours out of 24 a day once they've done a full day's work, and homeschooling and childcare. We've also seen that women were more likely to have lost their jobs or be furloughed, had to leave their jobs, again, often related to care responsibilities. And I think the very powerful session earlier on the food banks really showed, you know, that the impacts of this. But we've seen for the female-dominated sectors in general, you know, they've either been decimated, such as retail, or really high risk to work in, such as social care and healthcare that many of your members are in. So there's wide calls for a better future for women, because we don't want to go back to normal, because that wasn't good for many of us because of the inequalities. And actually, there's a stronger equality case and economic case for greater investment in things such as the care sector, rather than, you know, where the government is focused on construction. Not going to go, so the first group that I kind of want to look at is those experiencing domestic abuse, and as we've heard earlier, that, you know, there's been a massive increase in that, and it's a really significant issue. I'm not going to go into what it is in detail, but just to kind of clarify that when we're thinking about it in the UK, we're thinking about the kind of psychological, physical, sexual, financial and emotional forms of abuse and coercive control. And with the new law that's been put in place this year, it will be a statutory duty. So I think it's going to be of even greater impact to many of the organisations represented within UNISON. And it's also important to kind of recognise the so-called honour-based abuse. And as we know, women are more likely to be impacted and more likely to be severely impacted. But interestingly, many workplaces still don't see this as anything to do with them. It's a private matter. What's it got to do with the workplace? And they don't recognise how many people are experiencing domestic abuse. As we're seeing here, it's estimated around 10% of every workers in every organisation. They don't recognise the impacts that it's having upon the individual and their careers and their well-being. But also, you know, and as your colleagues have pointed out, you know, when we're talking about this in a business case, in a business sense, we also have to kind of be explicit about the business case as much as we might like to focus on the moral case. And it's really impacting organisations' productivity and absenteeism, and the costs are huge. We're looking at over £14 billion a year just in the UK. But one of the more positive things is that workplaces can provide valuable support for employees who are experiencing domestic abuse, and particularly the unions. And we know that UNISON has been a long champion of this and have been pushing really hard for the policies. So when we're looking, particularly in the time of Corona, we've seen really substantial increases, so much so that United Nations actually has called this the shadow pandemic. And in addition to the increase in cases, it's also been much harder for individuals to access support or to leave a perpetrator. And when we're looking at kind of the employment context, we're also thinking about the fact that, well, many people are now working from home, and that would be typically where also the perpetrator would be based. And as we can see from the statistics, it's had a really significant impact on many people's employment. And as we know, that was already a significant problem beforehand. And as the National Centre for Domestic Violence highlights, abusers always work from home. So kind of within this context, I'm hoping this will work. It'd be interesting to ask you guys, kind of, does your workplace or those of your members have a domestic abuse policy or guidance in place? So you could either type an answer into the chat or maybe use the reactions. So maybe a heart for yes, the crying face for no, or unsure with a kind of confused face. If you can see the reaction button, or like I say, pop an answer into the chat. You can see there's some kind of mixed experiences. It's not letting me see the chat at the moment. Let me see if I pull out of. So it doesn't appear for many people that there are domestic abuse policies in place. And therefore, I'm expecting that actually that none of the organisations will revise these policies. But if anybody has experienced that, if you could either say use the reactions or pop it in the chat.
Well, I think we're all being very quiet this afternoon, Jen. It's got a bit too much sun in that lunch break.
That's fine. So I think maybe the odd organisation where there's been a change in the kind of domestic abuse policies, but as we saw, there isn't actually that many places with domestic abuse policies, and sadly that kind of reinforces what we've seen more widely and what the evidence more widely suggests. It's suggested that in the UK it's only about 5% of organisations that currently have a domestic abuse policy. So I thought it might be useful for us to kind of think about what we can do when our members are working from home, recognising that not all of yours will be, but for those that are, and I think it's likely that some of us are going to be working from home for a little while, or we're going to be going back in and out of whatever this madness will be. So it's really important to kind of recognise that a member may be living and working with the perpetrator 24/7, and therefore, communications may be overheard or intercepted. If we think about, the spaces we're all in now, we don't necessarily know who else is in the room, who else is in the house, who else has access to these communications. So really important to kind of discuss with employees and members kind of what is their preferences, how can they have a private and safe conversation. Recognising that work may be their only external form of contact or opportunity for support, you know, even as lockdown restrictions ease. For many victims and survivors, they may be very heavily controlled and not allowed other interactions. So it's really important that there's kind of regular communications, that discussing well-being is routine, you know, like we were learning about for mental health earlier. You know, the more we can reduce the stigma of these, the more that we can recognise how common it is, sadly. The easier it might be for some people to feel they can speak up. Recognising that members may not have access to equipment, they may not be allowed to use the household money or the household equipment to work or to communicate with their union. Is there flexibility to work on site rather than at home, you know, kind of even when there's particular lockdowns or discouragements from working from home? In some organisations where you've got some staff working on site, there's potentially the opportunity for individuals whose role doesn't necessarily require it, for there to be some kind of flexibility there. And you know, and there's a wide range of resources for either victims and survivors themselves, but also for those supporting them or for those supporting loved ones. So just highlighted a few of these here, and again, I'm happy to share these resources for individuals. So then looking at the other group, we wanted to think about kind of people who are returners. So in this case, it's people who have had a career break, usually of at least 2 years, and are looking to get back into the workplace, as the CIPD identify. And when we think about the kind of people that might be, it's typically women, it's typically those with caring responsibilities and parents, or those managing their own health and personal circumstances. You know, we can see there's a wide range of barriers for people trying to return, for women trying to return to the workplace. They can face being pushed into lower skilled, lower paid work, or out of work altogether. They can be really disadvantaged by long hours culture. They can be blamed for a lack of confidence. Their past skills and experiences devalued when they return. It can stall their career progression, and there can be a lot of tensions between what the organisation and the employee require for flexible working. And we can also see, you know, there's barriers across society, that lack of suitable care, gendered expectations of who does what at home and work for what pay, and the employment laws and enforcement, or as is more often the case, the lack of. And we can see from this Government Equalities Office infographic, you know, there's real benefits to employing returners, you know, in terms of a business case as well, if you're having to argue that with employers. You know, it's improving recruitment, retention, skills gaps, productivity, employment well-being, increasing the hours that an organisation can work if they can offer more flexibility. And also kind of the legal motivations. If you've got to report now on the gender pay gap, well, that's one way of addressing the gender pay gap, by enabling women to come back to highly skilled jobs that they were involved in before. So I thought this might be of interest to people to kind of see that the amount of unpaid work that many people are doing. So you can click on this link, and I can see it, put it in the chat. Ooh. And you can see just how many hours of unpaid work. Let me do it from this way. Just how many hours of unpaid work you're being expected to do as an individual, as well as your paid work, and kind of the impact that that is having on people. I don't know if anybody wants to try and do that. Oh, it's gone to Jen only. Don't know why. Apologies. There we go. If anybody wants to have a go at doing that and is kind of willing to put in the chat or to shout out how much this is kind of costing them, or if anybody wants to be a guinea pig and shout out their hours, and I can click it in on the screen. Okay, but just to kind of to give an example, you know, if you said you're doing like 2 hours of housework a day, you know, that could easily rack up, you know, just that alone could be costing you over £6,000 a year. And as soon as you add in any kind of childcare or elder care, yeah, you can see the kind of the costs are absolutely skyrocketing as to what you would earn if you were paid for your unpaid work, and the same for your members. So I don't think there's anybody there in the chat. Okay.
No, Gemma, if you want to continue.
Yeah. So when we're thinking of the impacts of Corona upon this group, there's a lot of arguments that it's actually going to be an even bleaker future for returners because of the lack of attention to women's careers. You know, how do we ensure when and if they return, they aren't even more negatively impacted? Where's the retraining and skills? If childcare and the other care sectors don't recover, that's going to be harder for people to return to work. And as we can see here in the quotes, you know, there's going to be really long-term impacts on women's careers and earnings. When we're looking at flexible working, well, there's arguments both ways. Some people are saying, well, it might be more available, it might be less stigmatized because more of us have been doing it during the pandemic. But equally, there's risks. Are people going to be expected to just undertake work and care at the same time as they were during the pandemic? If you're out of sight, are you out of mind, as was always the case before with things like promotions? And obviously, as many of you will know, you know, not everybody is getting access to flexible working. I'm sure many of your members in the health and social care, there was no opportunity to work from home. But equally, you know, there's a lot of differences between the types of role or the types of organisation that you work with. So it isn't clear cut, and there's a lot of arguments, such as the CIPD campaign, saying that there needs to be more equality in terms of access to flexible working. And we've seen throughout today, Corona has increased gender inequalities and employment precarity for women, particularly those with caring responsibilities. So in terms of, you know, what can be done to support returners, well, kind of ensuring that policies are in place, that there's a wide range of policies, kind of career break, flexible working for carers, but that these aren't operating in isolation, that they're all integrated and they're integrated with the mainstream policies, and that they actually apply in practice, so they're not just tick boxes. That flexibility is actually something that happens in reality, and it's included from, you know, from the advert stage all the way up to promotions, and that wide ranges of different types of flexibility are actually considered. Challenging unconscious bias about, you know, this assumption that the ideal worker is the person that's available all the time, every day, and work is their main priority. Well, one, that shouldn't be the case, and two, it can't be the case for many of us. Line managers, how many of them actually receive training on supporting returners, how to kind of manage teams across flexible working, how to support staff fairly? And then for the returners themselves, you know, signposting for internal and external support, training and development opportunities for when they return, workplace networks or groups, mentoring schemes. And I know that there's lots of great work around kind of supporting women when they go on maternity leave, if they take in a very extended period out of the workplace, kind of what opportunities are there for them to engage with the union movement before they come back? And are there opportunities for kind of more collective support for returners so that they're not having to rely on getting a good manager or negotiating kind of individual circumstances? And then just to hand it back to you guys, really, are kind of any helpful tips on supporting members experiencing domestic abuse during Corona? Or have you been a returner? What would you like to have done differently? And kind of how would you now support your members? So again, if anybody wants to speak or if wants to put it in the chat. Oh, it seems like the chat isn't actually working at the moment.
No, mine isn't, Gemma. I can only send a direct message to Jen.
Oh
so
no.
maybe,
Are we able to open it up so people could just speak? Is that an option?
Yeah, of course it is.
If that's okay with people, let me take off
Yeah. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask Gemma? Or give some helpful tips? Jen?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've been aware of a colleague who's been the subject of domestic abuse. I did put something in the chat, but I didn't realise it hadn't come up. And I think it's highlighted how important it is to have a policy. A very particular nasty case. And I think with the talk about return to the office as well, it's thrown up the subject of, in this particular case, well, actually, I'm not sure this person should be putting themselves at risk by going back into the office, because the perpetrator is out there and stalking, and it puts her, even though she's currently sort of stuck in the home, can't even walk the dog or don't even go into the garden. You know, there is that question of the greater risk, because leaving for the office and coming home, it sparked quite a debate, to be honest, and raised questions that you probably wouldn't really think about unless you were dealing with that as an issue. Yeah. So quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think you're very right. And the commute is a really tricky point, and it's something that workplaces, I think, need to recognise is their responsibility as well. Because if you're doing kind of a job where you're in the office or the workplace or whatever your workplace is, and say you're working in a supermarket and your shifts are known, it's very easy for a perpetrator, even if they've left you, to still know that place is where you may be at a specific point of time. And sadly, in the Northwest alone, we've seen cases where that has happened. The terrible case of the nurse at the Blackpool Hospital who was killed in the car park there.
Thanks, Gemma. I can't see anybody else at this moment.
Did anyone want to speak about their experience of being a returner? Coming back to the workplace? I think Leslie's got a hand up. Are you able to speak, Leslie?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Not about being a returner, but one of the things that I've got a colleague who shared something with me only a fortnight ago, and it was around stalking, and I didn't have enough knowledge around stalking to be able to. I asked her if she'd been to the police, and she said she had, but until he does something, then not so nobody's taking on board the actual impact. She's worried about raising it at work, even though we've got good domestic abuse policies. I'm not sure that they cover stalking. What shocked me about it was she's a really confident woman in the workplace. Yeah. And when she started, I asked her if she was okay, because she clearly wasn't. We were in a Teams meeting, just she and I. She clearly wasn't, and she said, no, just a minute. And she got up, and I could hear her closing the curtains. And I said to her, are you okay? She said, no. And then it all came out that he sits outside a house, but because he doesn't do anything, and it's a public road, he's entitled to be there. That's what the police told her. He's entitled to be there. That question of entitlement, that he's entitled to harass her in this way. And I felt very frustrated, because it's not something that I've come across before. And therefore, whilst I offered, like you would, personal phone number if you need any help, if you need a place of safety, but she said when she opens the front door, she's looking all over the place to see if he's around. She parks a car in a different place. When she's coming home, she tries not to use the front door, but comes in the back door. That's no way to live.
No. And it's really hard, and it's hard for yourselves or for anybody who's kind of supporting an individual. And I think it's really important to kind of recognize that, as union reps and stewards, you have amazing skills in supporting people and the empathy, but you're not necessarily experts in domestic abuse or stalking or whatever. And I think it's kind of important that it's recognized that people aren't experts, and that so that they have information that they can, and organizations that they can signpost onto and support, that they can not to kind of ignore the problem, but to recognize kind of the boundaries and the importance of signposting individuals. Yeah, I think somebody's put a comment in about she needs to go back to the police and speak to a specialist officer. There is also the National Domestic Abuse line that we put in the resources. I'm sure they would be able to advise on organisations. I think there's also Paladine is a specialist stalking organisation. Any other top, advice or that people wanted to share or pass on? Because I think that's how we learn, because we can't know about everything as individuals. And I think it's really important that we kind of share these resources when we can.
Can I just come in, please?
Yeah.
Michelle, I'm just quite shocked to hear that Leslie's, the story that Leslie just told me, because I had a kind of incident like that as a teenager, where a school teacher was ringing my home.
Goodness.
And that is exactly what the police said back then, and I'm 56 this year. So I can't believe that we've not moved on, and because they couldn't do anything about him at the time, although he made it quite clear in lessons to me that it was him in the comments that he was making. But I can't believe, we're all these years on and we're still getting the same information, that nothing can be done until he actually touches you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's a really powerful thing to hear. And I'm so sorry to hear that your, experiences were so bad. And like you say, the experiences of women are still so bad. And I think, sadly, we're seeing this in the news pretty much every day. And we've seen so many very public cases this year. But I think that is the real importance of the union movement, and particularly UNISON, in that you have got these resources, you have got this support, you have got these amazing networks that you're involved with. And I know that it was UNISON that were a key part in pushing forward the new domestic abuse bill. So with every teeny tiny step that we take, as frustrating as it is when we really want the world to be better right now, I think there are a lot of positives, but yeah, sadly, still a long way to go. Some of the other union reps that we spoke to kind of described this as similar to the mental health movement. And as we saw earlier, obviously, again, there's still a long way to go, but there has been progress there in kind of addressing the stigma, recognizing it as a workplace issue, people feeling confident to disclose. So a lot of the learnings from that, I think, can also be applied to addressing domestic abuse in the workplace. And stalking, which I think is part of the kind of, the wider context of violence against women and girls that we really need to be addressing. Okay, so just kind of in closing, I guess, then, so there's some resources for people who are returners. As I said, there's also a wide range of resources for individuals who are experiencing domestic abuse, but also for those who are supporting those. So for instance, the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, they are very happy to take phone calls from individuals who are supporting other people. I know I called that line myself to support others, and that they're very willing to help anybody. And also kind of in the workplace context, there's a massive range of resources, again, that can help individuals either experiencing it or supporting others. And yeah, if anybody wants to get in touch outside of this, please feel free to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gemma. I'm not sure whether, Liz, are you still on the conference? Maybe she's been bumped off. Thanks very much, Gemma. That was, again, another inspirational presentation, and I'm sure some of us will take that away and be able to hopefully support women in that predicament. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, which is Molly Mayer, a Senior Research and Policy Officer at the Fawcett Society.
Hi there.
Oh.
Hi there.
Hi. Hi, Molly. Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm just going to adjust my camera here so much. Thanks very much. So I'm going to share my screen very quickly, and then we can get going. Oh, is it possible to be able to share my screen, please?
I'm not that technical.
Does that work? I've just done it. Should work now, Molly, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jen.
Great, hopefully you can see that now. Okay, so my name's Molly. I'm from the Fawcett Society, and I'm going to be talking about coronavirus crossroads, so signs of hope, what we can take from this year. So I will go through a little introduction about Fawcett if you're not aware of it, a little recap of COVID and gender equality, key data, and then signs of hope. So If you're not aware, the Foster Society is the UK's leading membership charity campaigning for a society in which women and girls in all of their diversity are equal and truly free to fulfill their potential, creating a stronger, happier, and better future for us all. So we've been advancing women's equality since 1866, when at 19, Millicent Fawcett collected signatures on a petition for women's votes. And she went on to lead the constitutional suffrage campaign and made this cause her lifetime's work, and eventually securing equal voting rights 62 years later. And today we continue her legacy of fighting sexism and gender inequality through hard-hitting research. And there's 4 things that we are fighting for. So we fight for equal pay. So 50 years from the Equal Pay Act, women deserve the right to know. So we're campaigning on making that into law, so that if you believe that a male comparator is earning more than you, you have the right to know if that's true. We also fight for securing equal power. So just 34% of MPs and 35% councillors are women. And we're campaigning to get more women in all of our diversity into politics. We're also campaigning to challenge attitudes and change minds. So we're working to tackle gender stereotypes that hold back our children, both boys and girls. And then finally, we're working to defend women's rights during COVID-19. So we're campaigning to ensure that women are not left behind or our needs ignored during this crisis. And so I think today we've talked a lot about gender equality and COVID, and I think it's important. We've seen all of these different headlines. So things like COVID's going to turn back the clock on gender equality. We're going to go back 50 years, the secession, things like that. But I think it's really important to ask, what can we learn from this past year? And when we talk about building back better, how does this mean that we're going to build towards gender equality? And the really important thing overall to say is that COVID has exposed the gaps in our society and revealed what a precarious position disadvantaged groups were already in before the pandemic. And this isn't just women, this includes Black, Asian, ethnic minority groups who have had higher death rates and more likely to work on the front lines, disabled people who've had higher death rates, low income people, where we've seen a real split between those that are on higher incomes and have actually had, for most part, a pretty okay time over this past year and a half with, staying home, potentially saving money and their job being secure, compared to those who are already were on low incomes and have been suffered even more. And I think it's really important that we don't talk about these groups separately. So different women face intersecting challenges because of their different characteristics. And so we know that Black, Asian, minority ethnic women, disabled women, low-income women, migrant women, young women, and pregnant and new mothers have had their lives made more difficult because of the pandemic. So for example, in polling that we did, we found that almost a quarter of Black, Asian, ethnic minority women said they struggled to feed their children, compared to 19% of white women during the first lockdown. And 34% of disabled women told us that their household had run out of money, compared to 24% of non-disabled women. So when we talk about the impact of COVID on women and what we need to do to support women, it's really important that we think about how differently positioned women are affected and the targeted support that they need. And so I think that we've talked already about furlough, so how furlough rates have been higher for women after the first lockdown, and this is because of the caring responsibilities that women have and the sectors that they work in. And then also, redundancy rates haven't been as high for women, but when we see the furlough scheme coming to an end in a couple of months, we're really concerned that this could flip because of the sectors that are currently just on the ropes right now. So hospitality, retail, that are getting by because of the furlough scheme. All of a sudden, if they're not receiving that support anymore, they may have to start laying off employees who they've been able to keep on to this point, and that will disproportionately affect women. In our own research, we've seen the impact of these disparities. So what we found that 4 in 10 mothers, they were struggling financially, compared to 35% of fathers, and this rose to 53% among single mothers. Over 4 in 10 of Black, Asian, ethnic minority women believe they would be in debt after the crisis, compared to 37% of white women. And 6 in 10 disabled mothers reported they were struggling to make ends meet, compared to 36% of non-disabled mothers. So what we're seeing is that as a result of women being more likely to be in low paid, insecure work, this means that they're also more likely to be enrolled without sick pay. So we know that women have been disproportionately impacted by not being able to have access to statutory sick pay as well. Also looking at the impact through our research, we found that we've seen women's well-being suffer at higher percentages. So in the spring, we found that 44% of mothers reported high anxiety levels, compared to 3 in 9 fathers. And then we also recently found that 62% of disabled mothers reported high anxiety. So how do we go about making sure this isn't the reality for the future? So we have 4 signs of hope that we think, where we think that the government could step in and introduce policy changes that would take advantage of what we've seen over the past year and a half and build on that. So we want to see flexible working become the norm. We want to see, fathers provide a greater share of unpaid care. Workplaces respond to the need for intersectional equality, and society better values carers, and we invest in our social care infrastructure. So looking at flexible working. So workers have had the right to request flexible working since 2003, but before the pandemic, only 27% of workers actually had flexible working arrangements, and 3 in 10 requests were turned down. But 7 in 10 employees in the UK wanted flexibility. And that includes 79% of mums and 27% of dads who said they thought about work-life balance when making career choices. And 8 in 10 mothers said they felt trapped in their current role by the lack of flexibility on offer in other jobs. So when you're in a job for a lot longer, you're able to build that flexibility up over time because you build trust. But then if you change jobs, you risk losing that. And so during the pandemic, 36% of workers did some form of home working. And before this, there's an argument that's impossible to work with greater flexibility and from home. And this just no longer stands up. We know that's possible. We know that we are able to have calls like this, where we know that productivity hasn't decreased massively. And so we also know that employees want to continue flexible working. So research by the Chartered Management Institute found that 69% of mothers wanted to work at least 1 day from home, and compared to 56% of fathers. And so there's a big risk here that if men return to the office at higher proportions than women, because they want to continue working from home, that we'll just see this further disadvantaging women. And so we know that when mothers ask for flexible working, this can be perceived as negatively by their employer because of this idea that they're not as committed to their job, or they can also miss out on really important conversations in the office. So everyone, either at home or in the office, might join in on a Zoom call for an important meeting. But once that call ends and a man's walking back to his desk and chatting with the boss about an upcoming project or something like that, he might get those favorable roles or be seen more favorably in the boss's eyes. And that's just not possible for those, mainly women, who are working at home. So what this means is we need to ensure that legislation is in place to normalize flexible working, building on what we have learned from this past year about how it can be implemented effectively. And so what we want to see is that all jobs be advertised as flexible unless there's a clear business reason not to. And we also want to see the right for successful candidates to take up flexibility from day one. So right now you have to have worked for 26 weeks to be able to have flexible work, so half a year. But we believe that, so for a lot of parents, especially, that's not very helpful. So it's not helpful to have to wait 6 months to be able to get that flexibility. You need to have it from day one. And that's what we're calling for. We also want more businesses to have to publish their flexible working policies. So right now, only employers from over 250 employees have to publish their flexible working policies. And we want this threshold to be lowered to 100 so that when women, mothers are looking for a new job, they can see what is open to them and not have to ask that in the interview or ask on day one and put themselves in a really awkward position. The next thing that we are calling for is fathers to provide a greater share of unpaid care. So before the pandemic, mothers were doing almost double the amount of childcare. So that mothers did 118 minutes childcare a day on average compared to 67 minutes done by fathers. And I thought that the little interactive scale that Gemma was showing earlier is really interesting. You can see how much of what that means, but monetary wise, what that is. And also, well, 95% of fathers in the UK take some form of time off at birth. This time is really short, usually about 2 weeks, so there's reserved 2 weeks paternity leave. But according to best estimates, only 3 to 4% of parents took up the government shared parental scheme, where both parents take leave. And so during the pandemic, the gap in hours of childcare does appear to have grown, with mothers having done 1.5 more hours of childcare than fathers during the first lockdown. Fathers did double the time they spent on childcare, so from 4 hours a day to 8 hours a day. And research for the Fatherhood Institute that was recently released found that British dads spent more time with their children doing care and education and came out more confident as parents and with better relationships with their children. So what we want to do is to harness this and put systems in place for fathers to be involved in the care of their children from the beginning of their life. And for us, the solution to that is to reform shared parental leave to create a longer reserve period of leave for fathers, paid at a rate that they can afford to take time off. So right now, the shared parental leave system, I think there's an idea that dads just don't want to be involved in the care of their children because of social norms and things like that. And yes, to an extent that's true, but we also need to look at this from a really systematic approach. And so 44% of families aren't even eligible for shared parental leave because in order to take it, both parents need to have worked for at least 26 weeks before the 15th week of the pregnancy, which works out to about 40 weeks before the due date. I think we all know that you don't actually know that you're pregnant the second it happens, or sometimes you don't plan this. And so even for families that no matter the circumstances of being pregnant, you should have a right to be able to take this, take parental leave. The other issue is that if a mother is a contract worker, a freelancer, or self-employed, the father, even if he's an employee, can't take it. And so what this means is that so many parents that wish would be like to, just don't, it's not even a choice. Then for those who are eligible, shared parental leave is paid at £150 a week. That's half of the national living wage. So for so many families, again, that's just not affordable. And we get into this really difficult catch-22 where fathers and men in general are usually the higher income earners in a couple. So it makes economic sense then for the mother to take time off because you're not losing as much income at that point. But because moms are the ones that do that, that reinforces the gender pay gap and we're just left right back where we started. So for many families, it's just not possible for dads to take leave. And then, so if you've overcome that and you are eligible and you have enough money, the other issue is that any time taken by the fathers means that moms can't take that time. And we do know that some mothers need the full 12 months after having a child. Childbirth can be really tough. It can be very traumatic. And some mothers need that time. And so it's either not possible or just not ideal for families, for fathers to take leave. Also, then this reinforces the cultural norms that the leave belongs to the mother and it's unusual for dads to take it. And that can mean they face barriers at work. And so what we're calling for is a 6+6+6 model. So it would be 6 months maternity leave, and then 6 months each of reserved parental leave for mothers and fathers. So in total, moms would have 12 months, dads would have 6 months. And we want this to be paid with at least the national living wage minimum, but the first half at 70%. And what we know is that when reserve leave exists, dads take it. So I did some work in Canada, where I'm from, and compared the province of Quebec, where they were, up until a couple of years ago, were the only province that had reserve leave for dads, and the rest of the country had a really similar policy to shared parental leave. And what we found was that in the rest of the country, where any time the dads took, they reduced the amount of time moms could take, 20% fathers took leave after their kids, after having a child. In Quebec, where they had 5 weeks reserved use it or lose it leave for dads, 85% of dads took it. So we know they'll take it up. And the really important thing is that when fathers take longer leave, that means they're more closely involved with care work for the rest of their child's life. It's also been associated with higher cognitive scores in children. And so we want to be able to build on this desire for dads. We've seen it over the past year, dads wanting to be involved, seeing what it takes to raise the children, and be able to cement this really early on in their child's life. The next thing, what we want to see and are hopeful, is that the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on people of color and the Black Lives Matter movement has led to closer attention being paid to many structural inequalities and how racism impact life chances. So if we look at this graph, it shows the median wage gap of women by different ethnicities compared to white British men. And what we can see is that there is a huge variation in the pay among women. So white British women are about in the middle, but we see the pay gaps for white and Black Caribbean women, Pakistani women, white and Black African women, Bangladeshi women are much higher, and we need to take this into consideration. And these gaps arise from a range of different factors, but we do know that clear discrimination is part of this. So research showing that simply changing the name on a job application from one that reads as a white British to one that's just an ethnic minority background means they must apply for 60% more roles that they get. And employees from all ethnic minority backgrounds are more likely to say that they have been overlooked for a promotion. And so there's many things that need to be done in order to move towards a more intersectional equality for women of color. And this encompasses reform of education, social security, and policing, just to name a few. But within the workplace, a positive first step would be extending gender pay gap reporting requirements. So right now, employers with more than 250 employees need to publish their gender pay gap, but they don't need to publish their ethnicity pay gap. Some do, but they don't have to. And so we want to see the government require employers with a minimum of 100 employees to publish both, so that employers are spurred to take action on racial and gender inequality and the intersection of the two. Finally, our last hope is that society better values our carers and we invest in social care infrastructure. So in March 2019, the pay for direct care workers in the independent sector was £8.52 an hour, and this is about £16,400 a year. And this is even lower in some settings. So workers in independent adult residential care homes get $8.33 per hour. And we know that workers in these conditions face poor conditions, and they work on 0-hour contracts. And this rises to, a quarter work on 0-hour contracts, and this rises to over 2 in 5 for those who work in domiciliary care. So that's visiting people to support them in their homes. And more than half of local authorities do not require companies they contract to provide domiciliary care to pay their workers for travel time between these short appointments. So you might go visit for 20 minutes and then drive for half an hour, another 20 minutes. That half an hour isn't paid. And so this results in nearly 2/3 only being paid for the time they're actually in people's homes, despite the numerous trips they have to make. So our hope is that a positive impact of the pandemic will push the question of who does our caring and what their working conditions are like up the agenda. And what we want to see from that is that the government sustainably invests in our social care infrastructure to ensure a real living wage for all care workers and end exploitative terms and conditions. So the power to change does lie in the hands of government, national and local, because the state pays for the care of 70% of those who need it, aside from those who do unpaid care. As the biggest buyer in the market for social care, government can set a standard that will impact all care workers, yet state funding has fallen by 2% in real terms since 2009-2010. And our polling that we did last year found that 65% of the public support a 1% increase in income tax to fund a pay rise for carers, with support consistent across party lines. And this change would raise £5.5 billion. And so the social care sector requires urgent, properly funded, sustainable reform that improves care workers' pay and values them appropriately. So just to summarize, how to make gender equality a reality, we need to have all jobs advertised flexibly and flexible working, a day one right, well-paid reserved leave for dads, ethnicity pay gap reporting, and investment in social care infrastructure. And then there's a little slide about Fawcett if you want to know more. And if anyone has any questions, happy to take them. I don't know if I can see the chat, but feel free to unmute yourselves.
Thanks, Molly. That was another inspirational speaker that we've had again this afternoon. There's just been so much information to try and digest today. But if you've got any questions, I'm not sure whether the chat function is working properly, but if anybody has anything and we wish to speak or ask any questions, please raise your hands. Molly, are you able to share your presentation?
Yeah, I can do that if you'd like. First,
Brilliant.
I send it to Jennifer. Is that the best way? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Great.
Have we got any questions? I'm just going down the list. If anybody's got any hands up. No. Oh, you've got away with that one, haven't you, Molly?
It's okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Molly, and again thank you to Gemma to really inspirational speakers again and giving us a lot of food for thought to take away. Thank you. Shell, do you want to say something? Not sure, quite sure what's happened there. I'd like us all now to give a very warm welcome to our very own first woman General Secretary, Christina McInerney, and thank again to all of those who nominated Empowering Women and helped celebrate the extraordinary achievements of women in UNISON across the Northwest during the COVID pandemic. Christina will announce the overall winner of the Women's Committee First Women in the UNISON Recognition Award. So I'll now pass over to Christina.
Thanks so much, Sharon. Just checking you can hear me okay? Yeah?
Yes, we can.
Yeah,
yes,
you can hear me.
hear you loud and clear.
Right. Okay, so just to say thanks very much for inviting me. It's great to be here and part of your event today. And I just wanted to say a few words. I was asked to say a few words before we go into the awards, if that's all right. I know you've been covering many of the issues around the pandemic, so I won't say too much. But the virus has, as we all know, shone a spotlight on inequality at home and indeed around the world. We've seen, and I know you've covered this morning, the disproportionate impact on Black people, on disabled people, on those with low incomes, and of course on women. And since the start of the pandemic, the number of women in the workforce has declined. Women's earnings have gone down, employment prospects have got worse, and the gender pay gap is widening. As well as having to be the main people who've got us through it, it's had this double, triple whammy on so many women. It's gone backwards, and not just gender equality, but we've seen the impact on Black people, the horrific rise in racism, with too many people feeling safe to express their vile views. But we've also seen the response to this up and down the country, with people demonstrating, and I understand there was something happening in Manchester today as well, speaking out against it, and a petition to ban racists from football for life reaching well over 1 million signatories, including my own, in a matter of days. And I think all of this leads us to, we all know that 2020 and 2021 will be remembered mostly for the way COVID has changed our lives. And we have to make sure that people don't forget who it was that kept this country going, and the fact that that came at such a high price. But we should also remember that in every part of the world, strides have been made in women's rights and gender equality. It's not all doom and gloom. Whether it's the new laws addressing domestic violence and equality, or the critical leadership roles played by women during the pandemic, but also it's about women in ordinary jobs, essential jobs across the UK, making an extraordinary contribution. Because our public services would have come to a standstill, vulnerable people would have suffered, children would have lost out even more than they have done without the vital jobs done by women. Women working in schools and colleges and universities, in hospitals and care homes, in police forces and call centres, in local councils and in voluntary organisations. Quite simply, it's our members. There's not a single thing that's happened during this pandemic, I don't believe, that hasn't somewhere had women, had UNISON members at the heart of the response to it. People who went to work to keep the rest of us safe, people who made sure we still had water and energy, and people who did things like keep the Mersey Tunnel running or the Thames Barrier operating safely.
Platform on social media, on Twitter, So I just wanted to say it's really important. There are people here or who aren't here who stand with us, and the North West UNISON Women's Group.
Sorry, I wasn't sure what that was.
Apologies, Christina, not sure.
Christina, I think it was Liz. She's at the rally for showing
right.
the red card in Manchester. She's seeing it on a screen there. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm glad she's there. We've done a lot of work with Show Racism, the Red Card, so it's brilliant that we're actually there today supporting that. But just to go back, if you look at some of the countries where women have been in leadership positions, like New Zealand, Germany, Finland, Bangladesh, the decisive actions of these women in charge led to fewer cases and fewer deaths. And we've seen, even things at home. Last year, the Scottish Parliament voted unanimously in favour of the period products bill, making Scotland the first country to allow free and universal access to menstrual products in public buildings, including schools and universities. A huge stride forward in highlighting issues around period poverty. But we also saw last year unprecedented increase in contact from members on issues like domestic abuse. So I'm particularly proud of the role that UNISON women members have played in winning workplace protections in law for domestic abuse victims. On the 1st of February, just this year, the House of Lords agreed to UNISON's amendment to extend protection orders for victims from the home to the workplace. Because as we know, domestic abuse is a workplace issue. But we've been campaigning on a whole range of issues, things that you've been covering this morning, things like guaranteed parental leave, fighting for better sick pay, including statutory sick pay. And as you've just this minute been discussing, the need for better and more affordable childcare and day one rights to flexible working. And across the world, we campaign against violence and discrimination against women wherever we see it, working with our sister unions to fight against modern day slavery, poverty wages, and lack of health and legal rights, all of which we know disproportionately affect women and through them, children. It's clear we still have a mountain to climb, but I just want to say, as the first Women General Secretary, I take our responsibility as the biggest women's organisation in this country very seriously. And I'm determined to make sure, as a union, we don't slip back in our commitment to fair representation and proportionality, but we actually make it stronger and more meaningful at every level in our union. I want to make sure women in our union are represented in every aspect of our work and in all of our structures. And as I start, I'll give you an example. I want to know why so few women, so few of our members are engaged in the union, but particularly our women members, and I want to change that. And our recent elections highlight this problem. Just over 10% voted in the General Secretary election when I was elected, and less than 5% vote in our recent NEC elections. Quite frankly, these are becoming activist elections, not members' elections. And even then, when you look at who's voting, although we're a union of 80% women, only 50% of those who vote are women. So again, you have that disproportionate impact of fewer women's voices coming through. This is a huge challenge for all of us. And I will be coming to you, I will be coming to women's committees up and down our union to ask you to work with me to change that. And that's why events like this are so important. And the work you do in the Northwest, campaigning on issues affecting women of all ages can really make a difference. Through the work you're doing to develop the skills and leadership of women in the region, the leadership training events, the tailored and specific training you've been putting on for newly recruited women branch officers. And all of this brings me to why I was asked today, which is the Women in Unison Recognition Scheme. And it's an absolute privilege for me to be announcing your first winner and runners-up today. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of how the scheme was organised, but I have been asked to include a quick reminder. Nominations were sent to all committee members, Northwest branches and self-organised groups, inviting them to nominate Women Unison members, people who'd made an extraordinary contribution to their branch, to members or the wider union during the pandemic between March 2020 and March 2021. It was launched to coincide with International Women's Day. And people were asked to describe why they believed the nominee deserved recognition in terms of what she'd done and when, who she'd helped and how she'd made a difference. I understand the scheme attracted 26 nominations of an extremely high calibre and a panel consisting of one of the committee's co-chairs, the regional treasurer and the regional manager for equalities had, I'm sure must have been a very difficult and unenviable task of drawing up a shortlist of 6. And the committee were then invited to a special meeting on 9th of July to vote on anonymised profiles of the shortlisted candidates. But before we move on to the awards, one very sad story emerged during this process. What the committee didn't know was that one of the 6 shortlisted candidates had sadly lost her life to COVID. All 26 women who were nominated were outstanding, but I would like to pay special tribute to Nala Eljak, who was a member of Manchester Local Government Branch. Nala was nominated by her friend and colleague, Dawn Warriner, who described her as a tremendous person who inspired those she met and that she was an all-round wonderful human being who's left a legacy and a positive impact on so many people. I'll just tell you a little bit about Nala. Dawn nominated her because despite being forced to work from home after contracting COVID for the 2nd time, this modest woman continued to support people in her professional role as a neighbourhood officer and as a member of her own local community. She was living with the ongoing effects of COVID, and she inspired those she met by continuing to campaign on women's issues and to support her local mosque and local food banks. She was a committed trade unionist, environmentalist and women's rights champion, and she also raised money for basic living and educational items for a girls' orphanage in Sudan, and supported other projects here and abroad. With an MA in environmental studies, she passionately engaged people in environmental causes and inspired all those she met. So I want to ask you to join with me in sending our condolences to Nala's family, who were so very proud of her activism and her trade union work. This is a very sad and stark reminder of the impact COVID has had, and that behind all of the statistics we hear in the news every day, every one of those statistics is an individual with a family, with loved ones who had a life and had a future stolen from them because of this terrible virus. And it shows why it's so important that we never take for granted the huge sacrifices we know so many of our members have made. And it's why we should always promote and celebrate the great feats of strength and solidarity of our women members, and Nala, of course, being a fantastic champion and example of that. I understand that this scheme has had a great response, and the hope is it will become an annual event. And hopefully next year there can be a physical presentation. So this year's winner will receive a trophy that they can keep and vouchers for £150, and both runners-up will receive a glass paperweight and voucher prizes of £75 each. So I'll move on to the awards now, Sharon. First of all, the runners-up. These are Marion Doherty from Manchester Local Government Branch and Julia Maluki from Salford City Branch. So a word or two, and apologies if I'm pronouncing anyone's name wrong, a word or two about our runners-up. Oh, sorry, I've lost my, can you just bear with me, I've lost my list. There, it's there. So Marion is described as feisty, passionate, supportive and inclusive. These were the words used for the way to describe the way she had inspired, engaged and mentored women since being instrumental in founding and developing a UNISON women's self-organised group 10 years ago. And it was because of that self-organised group that women in her branch joined UNISON rather than another union. She's raised the profile of women's issues in the workplace in her branch and has been a strong voice for activism, keeping the spirit of activism alive at a time when people have struggled with day-to-day activities. She's been very active this year in keeping the group's focus on the big picture, and at a personal level, she supported young activists and championed Black women in the group, pushing for them to go to conference and to be elected to union posts. I gather that Marion has just retired, but it's clear from the description of her that she's someone, I'm sure, whose voice will continue to be heard, not least through our retired members network. So congratulations, Marion. And if I could move on to Julia. Julia has tackled two pandemics, COVID-19 and racism. She worked on the front line through the pandemic at great risk to herself and her family. She was the only union rep in her workplace, and she fearlessly fought her employers for proper PPE and helped to implement a package of support to protect care workers off work for COVID-related reasons. She helped to win two pay rises during the pandemic and to protect sleep-in rates. Fantastic achievement. She proactively led from the front in supporting Black Lives Matter and tackling racism, not only ensuring that Black Lives Matter was properly supported in her branch, but that members challenged themselves and employers over the focus placed on discrimination and exclusion. So congratulations to Julia. And now I'll move on to our overall winner. Huge congratulations to Heather Ruffley from Bridgewater Community Healthcare Branch, who was nominated by Denise Bradley. Heather stepped into the branch at short notice to take the lead and keep her branch afloat after being thrown in at the deep end at the start of the pandemic. She went from being a part-time health and safety officer to running the branch single-handedly, refusing to be daunted by the complex issues that took her way outside her comfort zone. With no other branch officers available, she worked over and above her contracted hours to ensure all policies were updated with the current government COVID guidelines, and attended, I'm sure, endless management meetings to support members through the pandemic. And this was in addition to still making sure the branch ran effectively and that members were supported with not just COVID, but also all the non-COVID issues that continually come up. It looks like, quite simply, without her, there would have been no branch. And Heather, I want to say a huge thank you to you. What's just been described and what's been told to me is that you're absolutely epitomise what happens to so many of our activists, and it's so great to have women like you stand up and take on that level of responsibility, and I'm hugely grateful to you for that. So huge congratulations to Heather, to the runners-up, and to all those who were shortlisted. Thanks to everyone who are shortlisted and nominated. Thanks to everyone attending today, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of it. I do hope these awards go on to be an annual event, because among all the hard work and the challenges that we face, it's always good to have something hopeful and joyful to take part in. So let's hope next year we actually have the chance to get together and to celebrate in person. So thank you again, and I'm so looking forward to coming up to your region to visit you. Thank you. I'll hand back to you, Sharon.
Thanks, Christina, and it's been lovely to see you today, and thank you for that, and we look forward to working with you. This now actually brings our conference to a close, but I would like to thank everyone for attending the conference today. We are all empowering women, emerging stronger and working hard and strive every day, to support our members. We would like to thank our host of speakers today who have been inspirational, and we hope you have enjoyed the conference. I don't know about you, but I have been quite emotional, but I have tried to take on board the wealth of information that we can take away and share with our members. If anybody has any questions, if you'd like to email Jen, I'm sure she'd be more than happy to respond to you. But I'd also like to thank Jen and the people working behind the scenes that have made today's conference happen. The presentations and emails will be shared by Jen after today's conference. And just one last message, after today, and talking about mental health, I'm not sure if anybody would like to look and set up a group where we can share information and support each other. If anybody is interested, please email Jen. I thank you and hope you enjoy the rest of this sunny weekend, and we'll pass over to Liz, Teresa or Rachel if they've got any further comments to make to close the meeting.
Thanks, Sharon. It's been a totally overwhelming event. Christina, welcome, and yeah, come up in person, baby. Come up to the Northwest and see us all.
Definitely.
I mean, we've got very strong women around here, and today has been a very emotional and inspiring. Oof. I'm telling you now, I'm stuck for words, and that's a first. So I want to thank Sharon. She's done an amazing job today. So, and Liz, so well done. And Jen, you're a little star wherever you are.
Thanks, Teresa.
Thank you.
Thank you. Liz or Rachel? No. Okay, ladies, please go off and enjoy the afternoon. Have a nice few gin and teas in the garden while you're relaxing, and we'll look forward to seeing you all at the AGM in September. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christina.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.